Good afternoon. It is day 38 of the BP oil spill disaster. Over these 38 days, BP has misled the public on the amount of oil spewing into the ocean. They waited until day 23 to release a 30-second clip of the oil spill. They waited until day 31 to release a live feed of the spill. They continue to use dispersants that EPA has directed them to replace. And while we all hope that the top kill is successful, it is one of several untested strategies to address oil leaks at this depth, signaling BP's utter lack of preparedness. Through BP's obfuscation of the truth, the federal government has been working to determine the impacts of the spill and to mitigate the damage done to our environment, economy, and coastal communities. This is BP's spill, but it is America's ocean. After the initial explosion of the oil rig on April 20th, the Coast Guard was first on the scene for a search and rescue operation that saved the lives of 115 workers. The administration immediately established a command center. The day after the explosion, the Coast Guard, EPA, and Departments of Interior, Commerce, and Homeland Security joined state and local groups to coordinate resources and oversee BP's response. Within a week, Secretary Napolitano and Secretary Salazar signed on to an order for a joint investigation to determine the causes of this disaster. Homeland Security designated this event as a spill of national significance to fully leverage resources for the federal government response. The Department of Commerce declared a fishery disaster in the Gulf to mobilize assistance to fishermen and fishing communities. NOAA has taken a lead role in evaluating the impacts of oil on marine resources and advising cleanup efforts. EPA has been monitoring air quality and has directed BP to use less toxic and more effective dispersants. However, in addition to the spill under the sea surface, we are also confronting the spill over from the Bush administration. This culture was established during the Bush administration's when it compromised the Minerals Management Service, or MMS, responsible for offshore drilling oversight. On Tuesday, the Department of Interior released a report detailing how, during the Bush administration, MMS personnel routinely accepted expensive gifts from the very people they were supposed to be regulating. The Obama administration has responded with a plan to fundamentally restructure the MMS into separate entities for leasing, safety, and revenue collection, with independent missions to strengthen oversight of offshore energy operations. Any changes in MMS personnel will not change their dedication to effective oversight of our energy resources. Congress has also been working to determine the causes and consequences of this disaster, holding the companies involved accountable. BP, Halliburton, and Transocean have been questioned about the events leading to the accident. Chairman Waxman and Chairman Stupak are leading that investigation, and they will get to the bottom of what efforts were actually taken to stop the leak and attempts to clean up the mess. Ocean experts have testified to the effects of the oil on marine ecosystems. I sought and succeeded in making BP's live feed from the ocean floor available to the public, working with members of this committee. For years, the oil industry told us an oil spill was impossible. Then they said stopping the leak is mission impossible. It's clear that BP was unprepared for this. America is looking to the administration to provide oversight and to prevent this from ever happening again. There has been an impressive federal response. To date, the federal government has deployed 1,300 vessels, over 1.85 million feet of containment boom, and directed 22,000 federal employees to work on the BP oil spill. As this work continues, we must realize that we cannot drill our way to energy independence. We have 2% of the world's oil reserves, 5% of the world's population, and we consume 25% of the world's oil on a daily basis. The BP oil disaster is another reminder that we must move to a clean energy future, buoyed by increased fuel economy, wind, solar, hydropower, and efficiency, and other technologies that can help us in the long run to avoid this ever happening again. Let me turn now and recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate you calling this important hearing today. We are all outraged and saddened by the disastrous oil spill in the Gulf that left 11 dead and have spread untold barrels of oil into the sea. It's a very, very tragic event for our country. I would hope to see more hearings from this committee so that we can get answers, and the companies involved from both the administration as well as the companies involved about what happened, how we can fix it, and how we can ensure that a disaster like this cannot and does not happen again. It's not time for knee-jerk policy reactions, but for answers. We must first determine what caused the accident and how we can prevent similar accidents from happening in the future. Second, we need to make sure that crystal clear to all involved that the polluter will pay. The American taxpayer should not be on the hook for a dime for the cost of this accident. I was a member of the Conference Committee for the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. There is no doubt in my mind that the President and his administration have both the authority and the obligation to take control of the crisis. Clearly, from where we stand today, it has not happened. The spill from the Deepwater Horizon rig a month ago is the first major spill since enactment of the 1990 law. The Oil Pollution Act gives the President the authority to oversee the cleanup managed by the responsible party or federalize the efforts. It is the obligation of this committee and the Congress to scrutinize what procedures were taken by BP and the Obama administration and how these actions or inactions led to the mess that we see today. Hindsight is 20/20, but lessons can be learned and applied in the future. The Coast Guard has been charged with a Herculean task. However, I'm concerned that the delays of the administration have set them up for failure. For example, it was 9 days after the accident before the administration tapped the Department of Defense to assist by deploying needed equipment to combat a spill site a mile underneath the water surface. I'm also particularly interested in the Coast Guard's delay of initiating the controlled burn of the surface oil immediately after the spill occurred. It appears that there could have been a delay in using that tactic because of the air pollution concerns. Was EPA involved in that decision or the delay? Did CO2 or climate change concerns play a role in that decision? Additionally, why were chemical dispersants that make oil less harmful to the environment not fully used from the onset? Again, was this due to environmental concerns that may not have been warranted in that instance? Unfortunately, this is not the first safety or environmental problem that we have seen from BP. Clearly, they were not prepared to deal with a leak 5,000 feet below the sea. There's plenty of blame to go around, but as the Washington Post indicated this week, you cannot plug a well with regulations, speeches, or paper. There has not ever been a disaster like this in the 30 years that they've been drilling in the Deepwater or the Gulf. After such a stellar safety record, you'd start to think that things like this could not happen. While we can't turn our back on offshore drilling, we need to do a better job, much better job, and be prepared for the future. We need to do what we can to prevent this from ever happening again, and at the same time be prepared for the worst. I look forward to the testimony and interaction. I yield back my time.
Great. Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the chairman of the full committee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman.
Mr. Chairman, it's now 5 weeks since the Deepwater Horizon disaster, and each day brings more discouraging news of the devastating impact this oil spill is causing to the economy, to the environment, and the people of the Gulf Coast region. Each day we're learning more about the cascade of mistakes and misjudgments that caused this catastrophe. On Tuesday, May 25th, committee staff received a briefing from BP officials, including the Group Vice President for Safety and Operations and the leader of BP's internal investigation. BP shared with the committee a 48-page document summarizing the company's interim incident investigation, and I ask that this document be made part of the hearing record.
Without objection, so ordered.
We learned a great deal from that presentation about BP's preliminary observations of possible causes of the blowout and explosion at the Deepwater Horizon drilling rig in the Gulf of Mexico. We summarized this in a memorandum that Chairman Stupak and I released on Tuesday. What we're now learning is that BP's investigation appears to omit key issues. There have been several reports today concerning questionable well-designed choices made by BP, including the decisions to use a type of casing that could allow gas to flow up the annular space to the wellhead, to limit the number of spacers centering the casing, despite objections by Halliburton, and to curtail the length of time that drilling fluids were circulated to clean gas out of the well. Yet none of these issues were mentioned by BP when they briefed our staff. That raises the possibility that BP's internal investigation is not examining the consequences of BP's own decisions and conduct. Our investigation is examining all potential causes of the blowout, including the responsibility of BP. That is why we're sending a letter to BP today, seeking more information on these issues. I want to thank Chairman Markey and Stupak for their leadership in this investigation. The committee's first hearing was held by the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee on May 12, where Chairman Stupak revealed new information about problems with the blowout preventer. Chairman Markey has led the way in Congress in investigating the amount of oil coming from the well and providing video feeds of the leak. Our next hearing will be a field hearing by the Oversight and Investigations Subcommittee in Chalmette, Louisiana, on Monday, June 7, 2010, at 10 a.m., where we will explore some of the impacts of this oil spill. We will continue a broad and aggressive investigation throughout the month of June. I pray that the efforts today will seal up this well and stop the damage that's being done. But that can't be the end of it. We've got to make sure that this kind of disaster never happens again, and that we know what went wrong, so we can hold the proper parties responsible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Barton from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you and Chairman Waxman for asking our witnesses to come today and holding this hearing at this important time. As we speak, it's unclear whether the so-called top kill procedure has been successful, but it does appear that it has been at least partially successful, and hopefully we'll know by the end of the day that it's been totally successful. No one can bring back the 11 individuals who lost their lives on the drilling rig back in April. We can't put the oil that's been spilled back into the reservoir, but perhaps if we work together, we can find out what caused the problem, what can be done to fix the problem right now, and what can be done to prevent it in the future. I'm disappointed with the President's decision today to stop drilling in the Deep Gulf and in Alaska. I think putting our drilling programs in those areas in a deep freeze is exactly the wrong approach. All we're going to do is cause unemployment and cause the price of oil to go up, which is going to hurt our economy even more, and we're already hurting with almost 10% unemployment. So I think that the President has made a decision that will come back to hurt this country. I want to make one thing perfectly clear, Mr. Chairman. Under current law, the President is in charge of this cleanup. This accident occurred in the federal waters in the Gulf of Mexico, outside the state limit. We have a law that makes the President in charge from day one. I do think the President made the right decision to put British Petroleum in charge of day-to-day decision-making under the supervision of the Coast Guard, the EPA, the MMS, and other federal agencies. It is the BP's responsibility. They're the primary owner of the well, and I don't second-guess that decision at all. But make no mistake, there's not been one decision that I'm aware of, unless some of the panelists tell us so today, that BP or Halliburton or Transocean or Cameron has made that wasn't acknowledged by federal officials and wasn't approved by federal officials. And again, It's real easy to sit up here on the podium, Mr. Chairman, and second guess. I went down to Louisiana with you and others of this committee and went to the command site and then went out and overflew the accident site. It is tough to be there and have to make decisions on what to do when there's no easy, obvious answer. So I don't think it's fair to second guess some of the decisions that have been made, but I think it is fair if you're going to try to pin the blame on somebody, as President Truman says, the buck stops here. And as this is a federally, under current federal law, the President of the United States is ultimately in charge. It is not BP that has not given the okay to build the berms down in the state of Louisiana that the Corps of Engineers until today had been sitting on for a month. That was not a BP decision. It is not a BP decision to be using one dispersant and then be told by the EPA to use another and then be told again to go back and use the other dispersant. In fact, while it was a BP recommendation to use dispersant to try to keep the oil under the surface, that in itself, I understand, could be a controversial decision. That was a decision that was ultimately approved by the Environmental Protection Agency. I think, Mr. Chairman, that this committee, under the leadership of Mr. Stupak and yourself and Mr. Waxman, with help from Dr. Burgess and Mr. Upton and myself, have conducted a fair investigation. My position on this is pretty straightforward. Let's stop the spill, and hopefully today we'll accomplish that. Let's then clean up the damage, and I know everybody is trying to do that. Let's conduct a fair, fact-based investigation, and based on that, decide what policies need to be changed, what best practice procedures need to be changed to prevent a situation like this from happening in the future. If we do that, Mr. Chairman, while this, again, is a tragic accident, 11 people have lost their lives, hundreds of thousands of barrels of oil have been spilled into the Gulf, our ecology has been impacted, our economy has been impacted. If we learn from this, though, we can hopefully prevent it from happening in the future. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Barton. At this time, the Chair recognizes the Chairman Emeritus of the Committee, Mr. Dingell.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And thank you for holding this important hearing today. The Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee held a hearing a couple of weeks ago where we heard from BP, Transocean, Halliburton, and Cameron. Today we have the administration officials. Mr. Chairman, I commend you for having the administration officials here today. Their testimony and their answers to questions are equally critical in terms of finding out what went wrong and why, and what to do about it. To our witnesses, thank you for being here today. Mr. Chairman, as I have mentioned in previous hearings, I've been a supporter of offshore oil and drilling. And I must say that the oil companies are making this support increasingly difficult. I've tried to support this when it was right and in compliance with our environmental laws and hoped that it was for many years. I come from Michigan, and we are a manufacturing state. And domestic manufacturers need domestic energy sources. Domestic oil and gas drilling is as much a part of a comprehensive energy policy as anything else that can reduce our dependence on foreign energy sources and increase our manufacturing competitiveness. On the other side of that, Mr. Chairman, I am an avid conservationist. I wrote many of our cornerstone environmental laws. That includes the National Environmental Policy Act, the Endangered Species Act, and the Marine Mammal Protection Act. These laws are a little like my children. I've protected them for years and intend to do so as long as I'm able. I would observe that they do not appear to have been properly enforced by the administration, nor do I see that they have been properly carried out by the oil companies. Balancing these views is challenging. Today I'm forced to come to a difficult conclusion. We need to establish a complete moratorium on all leasing and all drilling activity until it is established that all of it is done and is being done in full compliance with the environmental laws and with full attention to safety and to avoiding the kind of disastrous spills that we're seeing going on down in the Gulf. And so full compliance with the environmental laws has to be the responsibility of the oil companies, but also of the administration. And I refer very specifically to NEPA, which appears to have been significantly disregarded, and the Marine Mammal Protection Act. I don't believe that new regulation is necessary at this time, quite frankly, because we had our current environmental laws in place for a long time, and it's my belief if they'd been properly followed, we would probably not be in the mess in which we currently now find ourselves. And the fact that NEPA and the Marine Mammal Protection Act are good laws that work when properly enforced, but they were set aside for BP Deepwater Horizon in behavior that is unacceptable by our government. I am extremely dismayed, disappointed, and just plain angry about the process or lack thereof used by the Mineral Management Service. Drilling at any cost seems to be the modus operandi. Cash bonuses have been handed out for meeting deadlines for offshore leasing. Broad exemptions from environmental laws have been granted, including in the case of Deepwater Horizons, and scientists have been ignored. After everything we learned over the years about BP, I might expect this kind of behavior from them, but not from the federal government. I would note we have from time to time seen BP before this committee and its investigative committees to talk about failure in terms of welds on pipelines, major spills and explosions. And always we were promised that BP would do better. They've not. I do appreciate and do commend the administration's efforts to reform the way we do oil and gas leasing, but I'm not sure that's enough. Very frankly, we need a timeout. We need to be taking stock of what is wrong with the system, what we're not doing right, what we can do better, how we didn't comply with the laws, and how we're going to make sure that our laws are being complied with. The stakes are too high to do otherwise. I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. And the chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I regret that Mr. Markey, the chairman of the subcommittee, is not here. I'd like to answer his opening statement where he said the Bush administration is at fault for this. I think that's obviously a stretch. If you read any of the Air Pollution Act, which I'm going to read to you, the Clean Water Act, Section 311, C1A, the President shall ensure effective and immediate removal of a discharge and mitigation or prevention of a substantial threat of discharge of oil or hazardous substance. So the President's involved here. He's responsible. If there's any problem, it's he and the U.S. Coast Guard who report to him. Now, Mr. Markey went on to say there was an impressive federal response. Well, it's not enough. And in fact, even as we speak here this afternoon, officials in Louisiana are still waiting for the federal government to provide millions of feet in boom to approve an emergency permit to fully, not partially, implement their plan to dredge and build a new barrier islands to prevent even more oil from reaching their marshes and wetlands. Now, Mr. Chairman, Saudi Arabia had an oil spill in the Gulf. It was many, many times this, and they used their ships and barges to vacuum up the spill. In fact, there's many countries around the world have volunteered with the State Department, including Canada, France, Germany, and others, United Kingdom, to help with the idea of providing technical expertise, booms, chemical disbursements, oil pumps, skimmers, and wildlife treatment. And none of that has been accepted by this administration. The vast majority of assistance has not been utilized. The blunt fact is the administration is on the watch. It's their responsibility. Everybody knew that the Mineral Management Service was not effective. There were so many inspectors' reports about this. It should have been reformed. It should have been done on the President's watch, and certainly he has responsibility for this.
Thank you. At this time, the chair will recognize, I believe, the gentleman from the state of Washington, Mr. Inslee.
Thank you. Well, I am shocked that the Republicans are blaming this disaster on Barack Obama. It's shocking to me. that could happen. And it's sort of, it's, and I guess maybe I shouldn't be shocked, but I am. I mean, it's sort of like H. Brown, who I think coined the phrase "burn, baby, burn." He didn't blame the government for the arson. And those who push the drill, baby, drill position as the solution to our energy woes, it seems to me, ought not to be blaming the government for this particular tragedy. There are legitimate issues about everyone's performance, and it's appropriate to look at everyone's performance. But it wasn't Barack Obama's decision not to use 20 centralizers on the rig, which in fact the BP people thought should be used, and only use 6, so that they didn't have any centralizers. Centralizers are the thing that keep the pipe centered in the wellbore so you don't get voids in the cement. And the BP staff said, well, you should use 20. Well, somebody delivered the wrong ones to them, so they only used 6. And they didn't have any in the cement area above the hydrocarbon area. That wasn't Barack Obama's decision. It wasn't Barack Obama's decision to use a casing system that created higher risks of a blowout in order to save some dollars. That was British Petroleum's decision. It wasn't Barack Obama's decision to have a dead battery in the blowout provider that someone at either BP or one of the other subcontractors had and didn't tighten up the valve, so you had a hydraulic leak. So I think we're going to find we need to have, yes, greater oversight over this industry. But I'll tell you, Lamar McKay, who was just down at our Natural Resources Committee, looked a little sheepish trying to explain why British Petroleum didn't use the centralizers that they thought they should use. And he wasn't blaming it on Barack Obama. So I think it would be helpful to really focus on what really happened here, and I'll look forward to the testimony. And by the way, just one comment, Administrator Jackson, we are not going to let people take away your authority to prevent all the invisible oil spills that are going on from carbon dioxide making our oceans acidic either. We're going to keep that authority. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Shempkins from Illinois.
Now, Mr. Inslee, I was telling Administrator Jackson how nice I was going to be today, and you go rile me up because, you know, we could go into the climate debate, which I don't want to do, but I do want to talk about the pending issues, so we're pleased to have you all here. I will direct some questions on the dispersant issue and just getting clarification. A lot of us have been informed now. We're trying to gather information, and I will talk about the type being used, how it's certified, questions made that it's not good, and then the need for it, and I'll go in that direction. I think there is some valid concern about when we have an emergency responding in an emergency situation. The marshes are being polluted. We do have some delay from the locals who want to protect their marshes by the permitting process. I think we should be able to expedite that. And I think there'll be some emotions on all sides. These locals want to do all they can, and there is some delay on the local elected officials and their ability to do everything they want to do. But we're on this together. This is a huge undertaking. No one's happy about it. I am a drill, baby, drill, and I still believe that's important to our national energy security. 3,000 drilling operations in the Gulf. Katrina went by, no effect. We just can't be Pollyannish about our energy needs. I am one that will also continue to talk about our energy security and national security needs. So thank you all for coming. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Shempkins. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding the hearing. The Gulf of Mexico is in the midst of an incident that is a tragedy we've never seen, and my thoughts and prayers go out to the families and communities affected by the terrible incident. I appreciate the administration being here to answer our questions. I know your colleagues are diligently working to stop that leak. While I agree that we should look at how effective our government response has been and certainly look at the adequacy of BP's response plans, I believe that our efforts should focus at this time mainly on plugging the well instead of casting blame. We're certainly continue hearings on this issue for months to come. There's no doubt that eventual lessons learned from Deepwater Horizon spill will impact on how our offshore resources are obtained. Industry should provide an adequate response plan for every rig, and conversely, MMS should have adequate oversight to ensure that these response plans are adequate. Having said that, I want to caution my colleagues against rushing through any legislative proposal that adversely affect our ability to develop domestic resources. For example, automatically raising a liability cap to $10 billion when maybe a BP or a major company could afford that. But so much of the Gulf of Mexico is produced by independents who don't have the capitalization of the majors. These proposals should be thoroughly vetted by the committees of jurisdiction. Our energy resources are vital to our national security and economic growth of our country, and our country requires a safe and effective and steady development of its offshore oil and gas resources. I've been on this committee since 1997, and I remember about 3 years ago we were all lamenting $4 a gallon gas. If we continue the prohibition against outer continental deep water or even shallow water production, you can guarantee it that we will be back to $4 a gallon gas, and it won't be we won't be able to blame Saudi Arabia for it. Thank you for your work you're doing, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. Green. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Pitts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing. I want to begin my comments today also by expressing my deepest regrets to the family members and friends who have lost their loved ones. This is a tragic event. Not only have lives been lost, but an unknown amount of oil has been leaked into the ocean, causing great damage and horrible effects, and some of which we know now and some of which will take years to discover. In the wake of this event, questions regarding the cause of the explosion and leak have naturally arisen, along with questions on the appropriateness of response from BP and the administration. Particularly, I'm eager to hear from our witnesses today regarding whether or not sufficient response plans were put in order before the incident occurred, and if they were, whether or not they're currently working. It seems to me that the federal response has been not only disjointed but confusing and frustrating for those on the ground trying to bring relief. Prime example would be the EPA's convoluted instructions regarding the use of dispersants. In addition, Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal said on Monday that, quote, "We've been frustrated with the disjointed effort to date that has too often meant too little, too late for the oil hitting our coast," end quote. This is incredibly disappointing. As I've said, this is a tragic event. We need to make sure due diligence is done in investigating the causes and the appropriateness of response in the aftermath. However, we need to make sure the response of this body and the administration is prudent, one that still encourages our country's energy security and independence. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The gentlelady from California, Ms. Capps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our witnesses, and thank you for your testimonies in advance. 38 days after BP's Deepwater Horizon rig exploded and killed 11 workers, 15 to 40 million gallons of toxic crude oil have spilled into the Gulf of Mexico. The oil from the slick now equals the size of South Carolina and has soiled more than 100 miles of Louisiana's coastline. Fishermen working on the cleanup have become ill after working long hours near waters fouled with oil and dispersant, reporting nausea, dizziness, headaches, and chest pains. It's gotten so bad that yesterday the Unified Command recalled the vessels operating in Breton Sound after crew members reported health problems. Today, I, along with Health Subcommittee Chairman Pallone, wrote to BP urging the company to take the necessary steps that it apparently is not now doing to ensure the health and safety of the workers and volunteers who are cleaning up this giant mess. Quite frankly, it's an outrage that this company, which made $16 billion in profits last year, has such a terrible record on safety for the drilling itself and for the workers who are trying to clean up the mess. And that is why it is so important that the federal government is bringing every resource necessary to put a stop to this catastrophe. Last week, the President established an independent commission, which was modeled on legislation I introduced with Chairman Markey to investigate the cause, the response, and the impact of BP's spill. Earlier today, he announced tougher safety requirements for offshore drilling and a stronger inspections regime. And he took steps to ban new deepwater wells for 6 months, cancel exploratory drilling in Alaska, and cancel a proposed lease sale off Virginia coast. Mr. Chairman, this whole tragedy brings into stark relief what many of us have been saying for years, and which the Chairman in his opening remarks said as well. We need to end our addiction to fossil fuels. My only hope now is that perhaps there's some measure of good that can come out of the sickening sights of toxic sludge in Louisiana's wetlands, the oil slick on the open ocean, the underwater toxic plumes which continue to kill marine life, wildlife, and birds at a terrifying clip. Finally freeing ourselves from this costly addiction would be a fitting tribute to the terrible tragedy being borne by the people of Louisiana and the Gulf. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Ms. Capps. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Bono-Mack.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to begin by also extending my condolences to the families of the 11 brave men who lost their lives as a result of this tragic accident. I also appreciate very much the time of our witnesses to be here with us today to discuss the issues related to the massive spill off of Louisiana's coast. I know that today's hearing will delve into the details of who knew what and when they knew it, which we must examine. Yet we seem to be spending so much time pointing fingers and playing politics, which is exactly what has the American people frustrated beyond belief. What we have in front of us is a disaster that has extreme environmental and economic effects. Millions of Gulf Coast residents wake up every morning knowing that they are providing the food on our plates and the gasoline to power our vehicles. Yet I'm extremely frustrated to see both BP and politicians, truthfully this entire town, continuing to point fingers and play a game of gotcha instead of collaboratively and aggressively seeking solutions and taking action. We cannot afford more bureaucratic barriers to addressing the need to cap the well as lessen the spill's effects. The excuses have been many, and the press releases even more numerous, but today we need to get clear answers about the levels of preparation for the deepwater drilling taking place in this region and the clear path forward for cleanup operations of this epic disaster. The fact is, wasting time playing politics and placing blame on past actions when confronted with this national emergency is frankly insulting to the hardworking people of the Gulf region. With that, Mr. Chairman, again, I thank our witnesses, and I yield back the balance of my time. I look forward to the testimony out of our panel. Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady. We will now recognize another gentlelady from California, the third on a row, Ms. Harmon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We plan to take this committee over very soon. As Chairman Markey...
Please don't ask unanimous consent for that.
No, I was just stating our intention. As Chairman Markey said in his opening remarks, quote, "This is BP's spill, but it is America's ocean." That ocean touches my district, which hugs almost 20 miles of California coastline. I have always opposed drilling off the coast of California and have cast 20 votes, more than 20 votes, against offshore drilling over my 8 terms in Congress, including a vote against the 2006 Deep Ocean Energy Resources Act. Further, I'm an original co-sponsor of the Garamendi bill that seeks to ban all drilling off the entire West Coast. The events of the last month have only reinforced my opposition. Like millions of Americans, I have watched the days mount and the strategies fail. The crude oil gushing from BP's blown well is now threatening Florida's Atlantic coast, and when it gets into the Gulf Stream, could potentially spread thousands of miles. There's a Washington lesson and a national lesson here. For the Washington lesson, we have to dramatically ramp up government oversight of drilling activities and end the sweetheart relationship between MMS and industry. President Obama was right to force the resignation earlier today of the MMS director, who obviously is not before us now. And he and Secretary Salazar and everyone on today's panel all must do more, as we must. The national lesson is that America's insatiable thirst for oil must be stemmed. It's dirty, poses major environmental risks, and when we buy it from abroad, it enriches our enemies. We must seize this moment to end our crippling dependence on oil. Enough is more than enough. I yield back.
Thank you. I believe Dr. Burgess is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've heard a number of things today. We're going to hear a number of things from our witnesses, and I'm anxious to do so. Again, I just reiterate some of the questions that came up in earlier hearings that we've had. Particularly, I'm glad we do have a representative from Minerals Management Service. The application that was submitted for the Deepwater Horizon drilling permit in March of 2009 raises some serious issues. Section 2.7 blowout scenario, a scenario for a potential blowout of the well from which BP would expect to have the highest volume of liquid hydrocarbons, is not required for the operations proposed in this exploration plan. 2.3, BP Exploration Production Incorporated does not propose to utilize new techniques or unusual technologies for these operations. They're drilling in 5,000 feet of water going down 18,000 feet. That does sound new and unusual to me. Section 14.2.2, in the event of an unanticipated blowout resulting in an oil spill, it is unlikely to have an impact based on industry-wide standards for using proven equipment and technology for such responses. Implementation of BP's regional oil spill response plan, which address available equipment and personnel, techniques, and recovery and removal of the oil spill. Why was this application, I mean, shame on BP. Shame on BP for submitting an application that was so scant on details, but why was an application like this ever accepted in the first place? Now, we've heard other people in their opening statements make comments about folks around the country that are concerned about this and want to help. I did 2 town halls on Saturday. I mean, town halls in North Texas. A fellow brought in this contraption and showed it to me. That's basically a Coke bottle that's been cut in half. He's got this thing filled with what looked like sawdust, but it was some sort of polypropylene material that he has, and apparently it has another federal use, so it's something that's already been approved by the EPA. He poured a bottle of gunk like Ed Markey had in here the other day, poured the bottle of gunk in the top, and you can see down the bottom in the mayonnaise jar, his equipment was not very sophisticated. It looks like clear water is coming out. This individual had been trying to get his technique, get some recognition of his technique. There's people like this all over the country that are willing to help. They want to help clean up their coastline. Governor Jindal wants to help the coastline, and he's been prevented by the Corps of Engineers and the Environmental Protection Agency. It's time to give him, relax those standards, and give him the authority that he needs to do what needs to be done. And I'll yield back.
Thank you, the gentleman. At this time, the chair recognizes the gentlelady from Wisconsin, Ms. Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just came from a hearing at the Judiciary Committee on the BP oil spill and liability issues, where we heard from Keith Jones, the father of one of the men who lost his life. I also heard from 2 survivors from the explosion, and I dare say there wasn't a dry eye in the audience as the 3 of them testified. Like so many of my colleagues and my fellow Wisconsinites and all Americans, I'm really angry about the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, and sad and angry about the loss of life. I'm horrified by the negligence and the conflicts of interest that have been revealed and exhibited leading up to this tragedy. And I'm furious that for over a month, oil has been spewing into the Gulf of Mexico, endangering lives and livelihoods and our precious ecosystem with no end in sight. There are several of the aspects of this crisis that are particularly troublesome. The conflicts of interests at the Mineral Management Service allowed the agency to oversee the safety of offshore drilling while simultaneously collecting royalties from the companies they were overseeing, and this is unacceptable. We've heard the reports of staff members at the agency repeatedly accepting tickets to events and lunches and other gifts from industry. Equally disturbing is that BP has used unprecedented volumes of chemical dispersants to break up the oil offshore that we now learn could further imperil the mammals and fish and birds and turtles that inhabit the Gulf region. And despite EPA belatedly telling BP to limit use of this product, the company has continued to do so. The situation in the Gulf appears to be one of a company continuously believing that it is above the law, ignoring warning signs, shortcutting proper procedure, failing to properly plan for a disaster, and putting profits over other considerations. Mr. Chairman, this spill is a tragic reminder that we must rethink our nation's energy policy and move toward a post-petroleum economy. I thank our witnesses, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentlelady. The gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit this into the record. It's a statement from the U.S. Travel Association combating the BP oil spill.
Without objection.
Thank you. Yesterday we paid respects to the 11 men who lost their lives in the explosion of the rig, and our prayers go out to them and their families, and I know some of the families are here today, and I hope to have the opportunity to meet with them. I hope the top kill is successful today, and we may not know that for a few days, but we can't forget that more than a month's worth of oil has already spilled into the Gulf and is moving its way into our marshes, and that's going to be something we're going to have to be working for a long time to clean up that mess. But today the President held a press conference where he said that he's been in charge from day one, and I've just got to disagree. If this has been his top priority, if he's been in charge from day one, then why is it that it took more than 16 days to get an answer from our governor and our local officials who submitted a plan to protect the marsh from the oil? They submitted this plan more than 2 weeks ago before any oil was in the marsh. It sat on bureaucratic desks, didn't go anywhere. If all hands were on deck, the President would have rolled up his sleeves day one when the governor submitted that plan and said, we're going to figure out a way to get this done and to get you the federal permit so y'all can go and protect your marsh. It didn't happen. It didn't happen for over 2 weeks, and now we're hearing from the governor's office that the plan that might have been approved today only covers about 2% of the governor's plan. That's just not acceptable. We're trying to protect our marsh right now, and if the governor, if the President's got a better plan, put it on the table. But we haven't seen them come up with any plan to protect our marsh. We've put one on the table for over 2 weeks, and nothing from the President. That's inexcusable. If all hands were on deck, then why is it that on Sunday, as oil was coming into our marsh, in Grand Isle, I heard reports from officials who said the boom-laying boats were sitting at the dock. They weren't putting out boom, they were sitting at the dock instead of putting out the boom as oil's coming into our marsh. That's not all hands on deck. That's not a top priority of the President. If he's in charge, as the law says that he should be under the Oil Pollution Act, that should have never happened. So I'm glad that today he acknowledged that some mistakes were made, but we don't have time for the mistakes and the excuses. We need action, and when he comes down tomorrow, and I know he won't share with our delegation where he's going or what he's doing, but I hope he meets with those local officials, and I hope he finally solves these problems instead of all of the red tape and all of the excuses that we're getting. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Scalise. Before proceeding, it has come to my attention that one of our scheduled witnesses, Ms. Jo Ellen Darcy, is going to have to leave at 1500, 3 o'clock this afternoon. And so we're going to allow you to be excused in just a moment. But thank you very much for your willingness to come. I'm told that your deputy, Mr. Terrence Ronksalt, will be available to answer any questions. But we thank you for your service. We thank you for your willingness to come today. I will say for the record that Ms. Darcy is the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, a position that supervises the Army Corps of Engineers Civil Works Program. The Army Corps of Engineers is an environmental preservation and restoration agency that regulates activities in the nation's wetlands. That's a very honorable position, and we thank you for all that you do. All right, if I can, without objection, we might go ahead and recognize you for your 5 minutes. I'm told that that may be in order. Let me consult with the ranking member just a moment.
I just might ask, too, for all members, we ask unanimous consent that their opening statements might be put into the record at this point, too.
Without objection. Yeah. Do you consent to the witness's testimony being given at this time? The young lady, the witness is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Congressman Butterfield, and I want to thank all the members of the subcommittee for inviting me here today. As you said, my name is Jo Ellen Darcy. I'm the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, and I'm joined by Ronksalt, who's my principal deputy, who will come up here when I finish delivering this testimony. And I'd ask that my written statement be submitted for the record in full, because I'll summarize here for you. In the midst of the response to the tragic Deepwater Horizon oil spill, the Corps of Engineers continues to provide reliable navigation on the river systems and waterways along the Gulf Coast as it maintains vigilant monitoring and assessment of the oil impacts. In addition, the Corps has provided modeling support for river discharges and is offering emergency review under Section 404 and Section 10 authorities of a proposed barrier plan developed at the local level intended to prevent the oil from reaching the coastal wetlands. The Corps has also reviewed and provided input to an interim EPA Region 6 oil solidifier policy and supports its implementation. Currently, the oil spill is not affecting dredging operations or navigation in any rivers or waterways along the Gulf. There have been no incidences of deep draft vessels getting oil on their hulls as they approach the Southwest Pass on the Mississippi River. The U.S. Coast Guard, working with navigation interests, has established cleaning stations in the lower Mississippi River to clean those vessels before they proceed up the river to the New Orleans district, as well as similarly this was done after the 2009 Mississippi River oil spill. The Corps continues daily monitoring of any impacts to navigation and dredging operations as a result of the oil spill and maintains continued coordination with navigation interests and appropriate agencies. The Corps has analyzed a number of water management conditions and possible actions to determine whether we could modify river flows to keep oil away from the mouth of the Mississippi River and wetlands on either side of the river. This analysis included possible deviations from the statutory 70-30 split at the old river control structure between the Mississippi River and the Atchafalaya Basin. Numerical modeling analysis has shown that diverting water from the Atchafalaya Basin to the Mississippi River at the old river control structure would have minimal influence on the movement of the oil in the Mississippi River Delta. Due to the extreme flooding on the Tennessee and the Cumberland basins earlier this month, Mississippi River discharges below New Orleans will nearly double. Even with these forecasted increases in discharge, we do not anticipate increased flows that would allow opening the Bonacary spillway to reduce the oil from entering the Mississippi Sound area. With respect to the smaller freshwater diversion structures, those are currently operating near design capacity, and the modeling again suggests that this may help slow the movement of the oil into the project marshes from the marsh and the open water boundaries in the immediate vicinity of these structures. Our team continues to evaluate other water management scenarios to determine if they will help address the oil spill issues. The Corps' Engineering Research and Development Center is also working with the United States Geological Survey Program to collect and analyze baseline sediment samples in the wetlands and the navigation areas. These pre-oil spill samples will provide critical comparisons to post-emergency sediments that will be required for efforts to continue with Louisiana coastal restoration through the beneficial uses of dredged material. I'd like to update my written testimony based on actions taken today. The Corps of Engineers has proffered a permit to the state of Louisiana, which grants partial approval for Louisiana's Barrier Island project proposal, covering the state's original request, partial of the state's original request, and includes six different areas. Once this permit is finalized, the state would be authorized to construct the barrier islands as long as this construction meets the terms and the conditions established in the Corps permit. The conditions in the permit respond to all issues and concerns raised by the other federal agencies. Additionally, the Corps has issued a total of 12 permits using our emergency authorities throughout the Gulf. There are 7 additional permits that are still pending. 7 people have been deployed from our research lab to support the Fish and Wildlife Service natural resource damage assessment activities. Activities include, but are not limited to, providing expert NRDA strategy development of bird injury study plans, global positioning systems collection and integration of field data, primary GIS, and mapping support. Our research lab stands ready to assist in the development of a common operating plan for the multi-agency oil spill response. As the Department of Army lead for environmental restoration research and development, our research lab is prepared to assist in formulating and implementing strategies for long-term monitoring and remediation of wetland and barrier island areas affected by the oil spill. Our research lab is also prepared to provide analysis for the eventual remediation of contaminated barrier sediment and material, removal, and ecological restoration. That concludes my testimony, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you for having us, and I apologize for having to leave, but Mr. Salt will be here.
We very much appreciate your ability to be here, and we also appreciate the responsibilities which you're discharging simultaneously in the Gulf. So we thank you for being here, and when your assistant sits at that table, then we will I think still be able to get the expert advice from your agency. Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Barrow, for an opening statement.
I thank the chair. I'm more interested in hearing from the witnesses than I am from hearing from me, so I'll waive an opening. Thank you.
The gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Melanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you having the hearing today, and thank the witnesses for attending. First, I'd like to say to those that want a political posture, having been through Katrina, Rita, Gustav, Ike, and now the oil spill, I'm sick of it. I'd appreciate it if y'all would respect the people and the people of the state of Louisiana, the people that died in this accident. It's not been fun for 5 years in South Louisiana. The press reported today that even using most conservative estimates, that the new flow rate estimates on the leak have grown to nearly 19 million gallons. It's about 19 million gallons over the past 5 weeks, surpassing the size of the 1989 Exxon Valdez disaster in Alaska. Having flown over this disaster this past week, I can tell you personally that the scale and the scope of this disaster is greater than one can ever imagine. My constituents in St. Bernard, Plaquemine, Jefferson, Terrebonne, Lafourche, and those that have not yet been impacted are watching the slow-motion tragedy unfold in front of them. And as of today, there is still no absolute assurance that this leak will be brought under control in the near future. I am heartened to hear initial reports that the Top Kill effort appears to temporarily have stopped the flow of oil and gas into the Gulf, and I hope and pray that these efforts, that as they continue, lead to a permanent solution. The response to this leak has consumed a tremendous number of resources and much manpower since the rig first sank weeks ago. I've been in constant contact with the administration and first responders on the ground. I've also reached out to the local officials in my district to take inventory of their response needs, booms, vessels, whatever, and to work towards providing these resources as best I can. And while I know this hearing today is to discuss the current response to the leak, I'd like to remind my colleagues in the distinguished panel of witnesses today that the recovery phase is just as critical as the response phase. Our culture is threatened, our coastal economy is threatened, and everything that I know and love is at risk. Even though this marsh lies along coastal Louisiana, these are America's wetlands. Excuse me. I just wish to submit for the record. Thank you.
We thank the gentleman, and every member of our committee and every American is praying for the people of Louisiana and the people of the Gulf. It's just an unimaginable tragedy. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Griffith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate Congresswoman Lawsaw's feelings, deep emotion. I grew up in South Louisiana, Big and Little Alabama, Chaffalaya Basin, the wetlands, and spent a lot of my youth in the canals down there, and I can tell you that it's heartbreaking to lose the lives of the young men from that area whose culture was working on the rigs, and if there's blame to go around, I think it'll be many people who will accept responsibility ultimately. I'd like to thank the chairman and ranking member for calling this important hearing today, and the witnesses for taking time to come. I was upset, however, to hear the announcement this morning that the administration has chosen to cancel the Western Gulf and Virginia lease sales. The American Petroleum Institute estimates that from the time a lease is sold, it's 3.5 years before drilling begins, and if successful, it's 6 years before any production takes place. As we learn from this tragedy, these cancellations do not reflect the stated President's view that we must have oil and gas production in our energy portfolio that we can produce safely. Canceling these leases does not protect us, and it actually is non-discriminating in that we're punishing companies that have an exemplary safety record. We must remember, too, that the Deepwater Horizon rig had drilled over 70 successful wells. As we learn the outcome of the many investigations that are taking place, it is vital that we learn lessons from this incident so that we can keep our workers and environment safe to produce our valuable oil and gas. I think we must also question the effectiveness of the response on the federal side as reports come out stating that this may be the nation's biggest oil spill. Has the bureaucracy been unable to facilitate a quick response? Reports from the ground say that it's not clear who is in charge, which leads to chaos. As we see changes in drilling plans and officials suddenly resigning, it seems that there are unknown facts surrounding the oversight of this project, both before and after the explosion. And thank you both and all for coming. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for convening this very important hearing. Thank the witnesses for their testimony today. I think I'm sort of like Mr. Barrow, Mr. Chairman. I'm eagerly looking forward to the testimony of these witnesses. One thing for sure, there's so much that we don't know about this tragedy. And what complicates the tragedy is that we're not getting much help from BP or from Halliburton or from Transocean. And perhaps the witnesses' testimony today will be enlightening on this very important subject. In time, though, we will find out what happened, or either the courts will find the facts and will report them to the American people. It is absolutely clear that more should have been done to prevent this disaster. Over the past 30 years, the oil industry has used some of the most advanced technologies to drill in increasingly deeper waters. The rapid ingenuity that allows us to drill miles under the ocean floor may have outpaced the commitment to safety. We really don't know the extent of this spill. I'm looking forward to discovering the true facts of this matter and to report them to the American people. And so the President's right. I happen to agree with the President. He made a very wise decision today, and I support the President in its entirety. Thank you, witnesses, for your testimony. I yield back.
Great. Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you, Chairman Markey. Thank you for holding this hearing today on combating the BP oil spill and examining the federal response to the disaster. I'm interested in learning from our witnesses their thoughts on what went wrong and their ideas moving forward to prevent this from ever happening again. I'm disappointed that no one from the Mineral Management Services is here to testify on their role in the response to this effort. Given the integral role of the federal oversight in offshore drilling operations, it is critically important to hear the MMS's point of view directly and to get their take on what safety lapses occurred and if any regulatory breakdowns happened that may have contributed to this terrible accident. We still have work to do to uncover exactly what went wrong. There are many questions that will be asked today on ongoing efforts to contain the leak, whether the federal response plans were in place prior to the incident, and whether those response plans have been inadequate in light of the ecological disaster. I commend the brave men and women who are working day and night to stop the leak and to protect the shoreline in the Gulf region. This is a challenge of epic proportions, and it is the job of this committee to conduct a fact-based investigation into the disaster to find out what went wrong and how we can prevent it from ever happening again. I look forward to getting to the bottom of this tragedy and finding solutions to it. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McNerney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This disaster and tragedy has been a sobering lesson. The technology exists to bring great benefit, but also, if not properly overseen, can cause great damage. Our responsibility now in this body is to provide all the resources at our disposal to stop the leakage and to help the people that are impacted. The next, we need to expose the facts about the causes of the leak and implement whatever is necessary to prevent this from happening again. I intend to pursue those responsibilities with vigor. But beyond that, this morning, along with Chairman Markey, Anna Eshoo, Judy Biggert, and myself, we introduced the Electric Drive Vehicle Deployment Act of 2010. We need to move aggressively to make our vehicles more efficient so we can reduce this country's overwhelming demand for oil. I invite all my colleagues to support this initiative. I thank the panel for your participation in this effort. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Blunt.
Mr. Chairman, I have no opening statement.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from the gentleman from Texas has left. The chair does not see any other members who are looking for recognition at this time. So we will turn to our first witness, who is Lisa Jackson, the Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. Before becoming the EPA Administrator, she served as the Commissioner of the State Department of Environmental Protection in New Jersey. She is a former New Orleans resident who graduated summa cum laude from Tulane University and earned a master's degree in chemical engineering from Princeton University. We welcome you, Administrator Jackson. Whenever you're ready, please begin.
Thank you. Chairman Markey, Ranking Member Upton, Chairman Emeritus Dingell, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify about EPA's role in responding to the BP Deepwater Horizon rig explosion. First, let me join you all in expressing my condolences to the families of those who have lost their lives in the explosion. We owe them our very best. As we all know, efforts to stop the oil release continue. While the environmental disaster that the Gulf of Mexico is facing right now certainly has no easy answers, EPA is committed to doing its job, protecting communities, the natural environment, and human health from the spill itself, as well as any concerns resulting from the response to the spill. Since the crisis began, EPA has had nearly 200 staff working on the emergency response, from scientists, engineers, contractors, and others in Alabama, Florida, Louisiana, and Mississippi. We are performing rigorous testing and monitoring of air and water quality, and we are sharing that data with the public every day. I have personally traveled to the region I grew up in and still consider my home, several times over the past weeks. For nearly a month, EPA has been monitoring the air and water for pollutants which could pose a health risk to communities. This monitoring is essential to ensure that communities are protected as we respond to the BP spill. All of this information is being made public at epa.gov/BP spill as quickly as we can compile it. One of our top priorities is the safe application of chemical dispersants. Oil spill dispersants are chemicals applied to the spilled oil to break down the oil into small drops below the surface. Ideally, the dispersed oil mixes into the water column and is rapidly diluted and degraded by bacteria and other microscopic organisms. We know that dispersants are generally less toxic than oil. They decrease the risk to the shoreline and to organisms at the surface, and they biodegrade over weeks, not years, as oil would. But in the use of dispersants, we are faced with environmental trade-offs. The long-term effects on aquatic life are still unknown, and we must make sure that the dispersants that are used are as non-toxic as possible. To date, BP has used 850,000 gallons of dispersant, a volume never used before in this country. Since this crisis began, EPA has not only demanded but has ordered, with the full force of law, that dispersants must be limited in use, in volume, and toxicity. EPA was first asked by BP on April 30th to authorize unlimited use of dispersants in a novel manner underwater at the source of the leak. The goal of their approach was to break up and degrade the oil before it reached the water's surface and came closer to our shorelines, our estuaries, and our nurseries. EPA demanded scientific data from the company to prove that such use of the dispersants was indeed effective. After that data showed that this approach was effective, EPA required the implementation of a rigorous monitoring system to ensure that underwater application would continue to be effective and would also track measurable environmental impacts, if any. 2 weeks later, on May 14th, after this system was in place, EPA conditionally granted authorization for use after it was made clear to the company and to the public that EPA reserved the right to halt the use of subsurface dispersant if we concluded that at any time the impact to the environment outweighed the benefit of dispersing the oil. EPA will also continue to push BP to switch to less toxic alternatives due to the volumes of dispersant being used and the lengthening period of this crisis. Mr. Chairman, we are not satisfied that BP has done an extensive enough analysis of other dispersant options, and it appears that BP seems more interested in defending their initial decisions than analyzing possible better options. That's why on May 21st, EPA, along with the Coast Guard, ordered BP to evaluate alternative dispersants. We continue to hold BP to this requirement, and I have further committed EPA's best scientists to independently evaluate alternative dispersants as well as verifying BP science. And this week on May 26, along with the Coast Guard, we have instructed BP to significantly scale back the subsurface use of dispersants to only what is needed to be effective. And we have ordered BP to halt use of surface dispersants unless they get prior approval from the Federal On-Scene Coordinator. That order has yielded results. 4 days ago, the total use of dispersants on a daily basis was 70,000 gallons. Yesterday, it was less than 12,000 gallons. Mr. Chairman, we are in a position with no perfect solution. As we emerge from this response, I commit to revisiting the regulations surrounding EPA's response, particularly regarding dispersant registration under the National Contingency Plan. I also commit to sharing the results with this committee and working with you to tighten the underlying laws if necessary. As a New Orleans native, I know firsthand the importance of the natural environment to the economy, the health, and the culture of the Gulf Coast. As I mentioned, this month since the accident, I've been to the region 3 times. I've listened to people in numerous town halls from Venice, Louisiana to Waveland, Mississippi, and other communities in between. I've learned in those meetings that the people of the Gulf Coast are eager to be part of this response. They want to be informed and, where possible, empowered to improve their own situation on their own. We have a great deal of rebuilding to do, both in material terms and in terms of restoring this community's trust that government can and will protect them in a time of need. This is one of those times. I urge that we do everything within our power to ensure a strong recovery and future for the Gulf Coast, and of course I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you, Administrator Jackson. Our next witness is Dr. Larry Robinson. He is the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere at the National Oceanic and Atmosphere Administration. Dr. Robinson guides policy and program direction for NOAA's conservation, protection, and resource management priorities. Upon being confirmed for the position on May 7th, 2010, Dr. Robinson went to the Gulf Coast to help coordinate NOAA's scientific resources throughout the region. Prior to his appointment, Dr. Robinson was the Vice President for Research and a professor at Florida A&M University. Whenever you're ready, Dr. Robinson, please begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Upton, and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify on the Department of Commerce, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's role in the response to the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill. I wish to begin by letting the families of the 11 people who lost their lives in the explosion and sinking of the Deepwater Horizon know that we think of them every day. The 12,800 employees of NOAA working in the Gulf of Mexico and those around the country send our deepest condolences. Because you already have my written testimony, I would like to simply summarize NOAA's role in the oil spill response and then provide a short update on NOAA's latest efforts. NOAA's mission is to understand and predict changes in Earth's environment and conserve and manage coastal and marine resources to meet our nation's economic, social, and environmental needs. NOAA is also a natural resource trustee and is one of the federal agencies responsible for protecting and restoring the public's coastal natural resources when they are affected by oil spills. As such, the entire agency is deeply concerned about the immediate and long-term environmental, economic, and social impacts of the Gulf Coast and the nation as a whole as a result of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. NOAA is the nation's scientific resource for the Unified Command and is responsible for coordinated scientific, weather, and biological response services. NOAA's experts have been assisting with the response from the very beginning of the spill. Offices throughout the agency have been mobilized, and hundreds of NOAA personnel are dedicating themselves to assist. Over the past few weeks, NOAA has provided 24/7 scientific support to the U.S. Coast Guard in its role as Federal On-Scene Coordinator, both on-scene and through our Seattle Operations Center. This NOAA-wide effort support includes data trajectories of the oil spill, information management, overflight observations and management, weather and river flow forecast, shoreline and resource risk assessment, and oceanographic modeling support. Now, a few specifics on 7 activities for which NOAA has responsibility. NOAA oceanographers continue to release updated oil spill trajectory maps showing the predicted trajectory of the oil spill. These maps help inform shoreline operation, placement of boom, and oil recovery efforts at the surface. NOAA's current forecasts show offshore winds through Saturday morning with magnitudes of 6 to 12 knots. Yesterday's overflights observed significant amounts of oil offshore around the Mississippi Delta and near the southern Chandelier Islands. Although offshore winds may eventually lead to a reprieve in new short-line impacts, the Mississippi Delta west to Timberlake Bay, Breton Sound, and the Chandelier Islands continue to be threatened by shoreline contacts during NOAA's current forecast period of 72 hours. The loop current. We continue to track the small amounts of oil that was entrained in the loop current late last week. Most of that surface oil is now caught in a counterclockwise eddy on the northern side of the loop current, and because the top of the loop current has now pinched off, any oil that was in the loop current will most likely be retained in the Gulf and not routed to the Florida Strait or the Gulf Current. Flow rate. NOAA scientists are part of the National Incident Command's Flow Rate Technical Group, which is designed to support the response and inform the public by providing scientifically validated information about the amount of oil flowing from the leaking well while ensuring the vital efforts to cap the leak are not impeded. Fisheries Disaster Declaration. On May the 24th, Commerce Secretary Gary Locke determined that there has been a fishery disaster in the Gulf of Mexico due to the economic impact on commercial and recreational fisheries from the ongoing Deepwater Horizon oil spill. The affected area includes the state of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. Secretary Locke made the determination under Section 312A of the Magnuson-Stevens Act. The declaration was made in response to requests from Louisiana and Mississippi based on the loss of access to many commercial fisheries and the existing and anticipated environmental damage from this unprecedented event. Fisheries closure and seafood safety. This past Tuesday, NOAA's National Marine Fisheries Service modified the boundaries of the fisheries closed area based upon the latest oil spill trajectories. The modified area increased the closed areas to 54,096 square miles. This represents 22.4% of the Gulf of Mexico's exclusive economic zone. NOAA is sampling seafood inside and outside of the closed areas and working with the FDA to ensure that seafood is not contaminated and to guide decisions about when closed areas can be reopened. National Resource Damage Assessment. NOAA is coordinating the Natural Resource Damage Assessment effort with the Department of the Interior as a federal co-trustee, as well as co-trustees in 5 states and representatives of at least one responsible party, British Petroleum. The focus currently is to assemble existing data on resources and their habitat and collect baseline or pre-spill impact data. Data on all resources and habitats are also being collected. And number 7, social and environmental impact. NOAA is aggressively working with other agencies and non-federal scientists to understand where oil is on the surface and below the surface and to evaluate the environmental impacts of both the spill and any associated mitigation efforts. To close, I would like to assure you that we will not relent in our efforts to protect the livelihoods of Gulf Coast residents and mitigate the environmental impacts of this spill. Thank you for allowing me to testify on NOAA's response efforts, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Our next witness is Mr. David Hayes. He is the Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of the Interior. Mr. Hayes served as counselor to Interior Secretary Bruce Babbitt and Deputy Secretary of the Interior during the Clinton administration. I understand that you will have to leave at 4 p.m. to attend to spill response matters. Mr. Hayes, so please begin your testimony.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If you could turn on the microphone, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, Ranking Member Upton and members of the subcommittee. I'll give a few oral remarks to accompany the written testimony from the department. We have been, as you would imagine, extraordinarily busy here on this matter since day one. The morning after the accident, I went down to the Gulf and was the first administration person working with Admiral Landry on setting up the command center. We have been working every day since then, virtually 24/7, with several streams of work, obviously working to plug the leak. Secretary Salazar has been in Houston 4 times. Dr. Marcia McNutt, the director of the U.S. Geological Survey, has been in Houston for most of the last 3 weeks, working with Secretary Chu and the directors of the national labs to provide federal oversight and direction in connection with those high-tech activities. Thirdly, we've been very active on the response effort side. The Department of the Interior has more than 600 personnel mobilized in the 4 command centers in the Gulf region. Including some of our highest-ranking folks, John Jarvis, the director of the National Park Service, is our lead in the Mobile, Alabama office, by way of example. We have significant assets in the area. We have 40 national park units and/or National Wildlife Refuge units in the area, and we are leading a lot of the natural response efforts on the natural resource damage response efforts. We also have been doing some special science projects. As Dr. Robinson referred to, there's been a flow rate task force established, and Dr. Marcia McNutt has led that task force, our director of USGS, and she provided a briefing earlier today that updated and provided independent governmental estimates of the flow rate coming out of the leaks. More broadly, I'll just mention a couple of other important aspects of what we have been doing. Obviously, because of our jurisdiction over the Minerals Management Service, we've been deeply involved in addressing the safety issues that have arisen in connection with this disaster. We have started our own investigation working with the United States Coast Guard, where Secretary Salazar also commissioned an independent investigation by the National Academy of Engineering, which is underway. Today, we submitted to the President a 30-day safety report that he requested, suggesting interim additional measures to increase the safety for offshore drilling. And as you know, the President accepted that report and took a number of steps to ensure that we would not have additional problems until we could fully implement those safety requirements and also get the benefit of the input of the Presidential Commission that he established and which is now underway. We also, of course, have been undertaking broader reform efforts at the MMS. As you know, we have taken reform efforts with the Royalty in Kind program and most recently have reorganized the MMS to separate out the enforcement function from the permitting function and also to separate out the revenue function, which collects an average of $13 billion per year. I'll leave it with that, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes, very much. Our next witness, Mr. Salt, is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army. He provides policy and oversight for the Army Corps of Engineers. Assistant Secretary Darcy delivered the Army Corps prepared testimony, so Mr. Salt will be there to answer questions moving forward. Our next witness is Rear Admiral James Watson. Rear Admiral Watson assumed duties as Deputy Commander of the United States Coast Guard Atlantic Area Command in April of 2010. Prior to that, he served as the Atlantic Area's first Director of Operations. Rear Admiral Watson graduated from the Coast Guard Academy in 1978 with a degree in marine engineering, and he additionally has master's degrees in mechanical engineering, naval architecture, and strategic studies. When you're ready, Admiral, please begin.
Good afternoon, Chairman Markey, Representative Upton, and
If you could move that microphone in just a little bit closer.
good afternoon, Chairman. Distinguished members of the committee. First, I want to say that this is an incident that's a tragic incident for the people of South Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and even parts of Florida. I've been down there, and we're terrifically sensitive to the impacts that this has on them, and particularly also the people who have lost their loved ones on the Deepwater Horizon. Since the night of the explosion, federal, state, and local authorities and the responsible parties, BP and Transocean, have been working around the clock to secure the leak and mitigate environmental damages. My role as the Deputy Federal On-Scene Coordinator is to support Rear Admiral Mary Landry, the 8th Coast Guard District Commander. We will carry out our national policy and direction and have oversight of all response operations as directed by the National Contingency Plan. The Deepwater Horizon explosion on the night of April 20th set off an unfortunate chain of events. The event began as a search and rescue case. Within the first few hours of the explosion, 115 of the 126 crew members were safely recovered. After 3 days of continuous searching, the Coast Guard suspended the search for the 11 missing crew members. My deepest sympathies are for the families and friends of the Deepwater Horizon crew who lost their lives in the line of duty. A massive oil spill response followed the sinking of the Deepwater Horizon. Unprecedented in its scope, complexity, and indeterminate nature, the spill has required an extraordinary unified response across all levels of government, industry, and the communities of the 5 Gulf Coast states. A federally led incident command was quickly established to coordinate this massive operation, employing lessons learned from the Exxon Valdez, the Casco Busan, spill of national significant exercises, and through the implementation of the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, the response community galvanized their efforts under a common framework provided by the National Contingency Plan. This framework, developed over the last 2 decades, enables us to respond to these catastrophes in a way that leverages the strengths of private industry under the leadership of a federal on-scene coordinator. In accordance with the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, we integrate the best of federal, state, and local resources alongside the best and brightest of industry, academia, and the public in a unity of effort to protect our national resources, livelihoods, and the security of the nation. From the President down, the federal government has taken an all-hands-on-deck approach from the moment the explosion occurred, including the designation as a spill of national significance, with Admiral Thad Allen as the National Incident Commander. From the start, our objectives have remained constant and clear. Stop the leak, fight the spill offshore, protect environmentally sensitive areas, and mitigate the effects on the environment, the economy, and the local communities. Despite several aggressive measures, including the top hat and the riser insertion tube, engineers have been unable to stop the flow of oil. Today, we eagerly await the outcome of the top kill. We continue to monitor the progress in operation, which is expected to take 3 to 4 days. In parallel, BP is drilling relief wells from 2 additional rigs. I meet personally with BP's Chief of Operations Officer, and I know their drilling contractors are working around the clock to secure the source of the oil. We will work permanently to secure the leak. While we are working permanently to secure the leak, we are attacking the spill as far offshore as possible. As the oil moves from one large slick to multiple ribbons of oil, we continue to deploy traditional removal methods. These include in situ burning, skimming, and pre-approved surface dispersants. The magnitude of this spill has required us to look at non-traditional mitigation strategies. Subsurface dispersants and satellite imagery are just a few of the innovative technologies responders are using offshore. Near shore, almost 2 million feet of hard boom has been deployed according to environmentally and economically sensitive areas as outlined in local area contingency plans. This includes different types of booms and other non-conventional barrier methods, including National Guard deployment of HESCO barriers in Mississippi and sandbags in Louisiana. As oil reaches the shoreline, We will continue to be aggressive in monitoring BP's contractors and launching coordinated federal and state actions. We require BP to obtain and deploy whatever resources are necessary, including new technologies, to ensure we are doing everything we can to protect the shoreline and environmental sensitive areas in the Gulf region. Mitigating the effects of this spill extend beyond environmental impacts and include damages to surrounding communities who depend so heavily on the Gulf of Mexico for their livelihood. The fishermen and small business owners are anxious to do whatever they can. Recognizing the desire of so many to help and support the local economies, the Unified Command has established a volunteer and Vessel of Opportunity program to maximize the opportunities available to the local communities to support response and cleanup operations. Although the incident remains under investigation by a Joint Minerals Management Service and Coast Guard Marine Board of Investigation, it may be months before we fully understand what caused the explosion. However, the spill has heightened the need for building resiliency into our nation's critical infrastructure so we are better prepared to respond to system failures and prevent spills of national significance from occurring in the future. Our response to this historic spill is far from over, but I want to reassure you the entire responsive community is fully committed and will continue to aggressively pursue all available options to mitigate the environmental and economic impacts of the spill. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, sir.
Thank you, Admiral Watson, very much. The Chair will now recognize himself for a round of questions. Deputy Secretary Hayes and Admiral Watson, this is BP's oil spill. BP hired Transocean to drill the well. BP hired Halliburton to cement the well bore. BP owns the equipment necessary to stop the oil leak and has sole responsibility to stop the leak and pay for the cleanup costs. But BP gave deflated estimates about the flow rate, how much oil was actually going out into the ocean on a daily basis. Couldn't provide a live feed of its efforts to the public for over a month after the explosion and has not yet stopped the leak. What oversight authorities of the federal government have been engaged to ensure BP gets the job done? Admiral Watkins.
Sir, as soon as the oil spill response started, we had designated federal on-scene coordinator who is responsible for that oversight. BP was given a letter that made that very clear, and the organization was established. All of the activities involving the response have been under the oversight and direction of the federal on-scene coordinator. As the incident grew larger and larger, we expanded that organization from a local incident command to an area command and finally to a national incident command with the Commandant of the Coast Guard, Admiral Thad Allen, in charge.
Thank you. Administrator Jackson and Rear Admiral Watson, yesterday the Coast Guard ordered all ships participating in the BP oil spill cleanup to cease operations after crew members on 3 boats reported health problems. Since the start of the spill, EPA has been stating that the oil spewing under the sea is harmful to human and animal health. Such illnesses is nothing new. Following the Exxon Valdez spill in 1989, Exxon reported 6,722 cases of upper respiratory infection for workers participating in the cleanup. Yet BP spokesman Graham McEwen said this past Tuesday that he was unaware of any health complaints amongst cleanup workers. And fishermen working on cleanup are saying that they weren't provided with protective equipment. Did BP consult with the EPA or the Coast Guard on the health effects of deploying volunteers?
We have at each of our incident command posts and at the area a safety officer, and our plans, our daily plans, are updated according to the changing conditions which these workers are exposed. One of our highest concerns has been for the workers actually over the well which caused the explosion in the first place from the volatile organic compounds. As we hire contractors, we ensure that they are in compliance with the OSHA standards for working in these conditions, and volunteers are given specific training and equipment for the conditions that they would be volunteering to participate in. For the fishing vessels, there's one set of training requirements. For the shoreside people, there's another, and then there's the wildlife people.
Do you think that these reported symptoms experienced by people involved in the cleanup efforts could be a result of exposure to the chemical dispersants?
Sir, I can't comment on that specifically, but I know that the Unified Command is responding to those and making changes when we determine what it actually is that's being reported.
Okay. How is the EPA going to evaluate the long-term public health concerns associated with the use of dispersants, including the ingestion of contaminated seafood?
Chairman, we will first rely on data. That data is being collected now, primarily along the shoreline. That's air data is being collected along the shoreline in conjunction with the states and also with 2 roving labs. We call them our TAGA vehicles, and also by the Aspect aircraft, which is able to take air samples, especially during surface burning operations. EPA is monitoring for particulate matter, volatile organic compounds, specifically compounds that would tend to cause odor from oil, BTX, benzene, toluene, xylene, and we've added those components that are most volatile in the dispersant. We are just getting that data in. We haven't seen any dispersant chemicals, but we have seen elevated levels of some of those volatile organic compounds. We've also seen occasionally elevated levels of hydrogen sulfides, which we're monitoring for. There's more and more data added every day, and I think it is EPA's job to assess both any short-term impacts. We haven't seen numbers that give us concern. We did have one volatile spike in the last few days, and hydrogen sulfide spike at one location, and then interpret for the people of the Gulf Coast what that means. Right now, if you go on our website, it says that what you smell probably can make you nauseous, give you a headache, irritate you. So the first thing to do is, if you're not participating in the cleanup or the response, is to remove yourself, because some people are quite susceptible to that. When I was there, it doesn't bother me, but I'm notorious for not being able to smell. If you're a worker, then we refer, whether we're getting those complaints from the workers themselves or NGOs, those complaints to OSHA, which is part of the Unified Command, because worker protection and safety is their responsibility. We're not doing as much monitoring out over the wellhead itself.
I thank you. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like each of you to give me what your estimate is of your cost thus far to the agency and what you might think it will be for the foreseeable future. Obviously, a ballpark figure is sufficient.
I'll go. To date, EPA has spent approximately $6.7 million. That's of that, we spent about $5.2 million in the regions in reimbursable funds and approximately $1.5 million in headquarters.
And what do you anticipate for the next 30 days or so? 30 to 60 days.
Double? Would double it, you know, just
okay.
to...
Mr. Robinson?
Thank you. NOAA has expended $4.6 million on Deepwater to date. This includes $2.9 million in reimbursable funds from the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund and $1.7 million in recurring activities. I don't have the benefit of an estimate of what those expenses might be within the next 30 days. We will make that calculation and get back to you.
Great. Mr. Hayes?
Mr. Upton, our estimate to date is about $8 million. That's fresh from House Appropriations hearing this morning. About 60% of that we believe will be directly reimbursable under agreement with the Coast Guard from BP. Some of the balance of that will not be. So that's our estimate at this point. And like Dr. Robinson, we can try to project forward, but that's pretty speculative.
Mr. Salt, you get the added importance, I guess, of if we go ahead with these permits that have been approved, you all may be doing some extensive work there as well. So what are your estimated costs?
Sir, I don't have a good answer to that. The Corps' work so far has been on providing certain technical analysis, particularly the hydrologic analysis, as Secretary Darcy testified, with respect to options with managing the Mississippi River, and then with respect to our regulatory effort. The bulk of our future efforts will be in the monitoring part of that. It's not expected that we would do any of the work. At this time, it's not expected that we would do any of the work with respect to those permits.
Mr. Watson?
My estimate is about $19 million at this time. I have to say, though, that one of the things that I'm responsible for in my position as the Deputy Federal On-Scene Coordinator is management of the ceiling of the emergency fund under the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund. It's a portion of the overall trust fund that we use for responding to emergencies, and we provide funding to other federal agencies, state agencies. We use that fund to hire contractors directly. It's not used for damage costs or claims. That fund, when I was down there just a couple days ago, was up to $85 million total, and that's when you're in a federal response. That's the number that you are managing.
Okay, my clock is running here fast. I want to get in a couple more questions. So as you all look at your costs thus far and going ahead, I would imagine that all of you will be seeking full reimbursement from BP. Is there any argument to that statement? Good. All five are unanimous. Ms. Jackson, you indicated that you've done rigorous testing, sharing the data, particularly of the subsurface disbursements. Are they work? Did they work? Are they work? Is that the reason why why it's been reduced from 70,000 gallons to 12,000 gallons? Because they're working? Because based on what I've seen, there's not a lot that's working. So tell me how they're working if in fact you're reducing the flow by considerable amount.
Thank you, Mr. Upton. One of the reasons that BP first requested the ability to use dispersants in the subsea, something that's never been done as far as we can tell anywhere in the world, is that they claimed they could use much less dispersant and still be much more effective. That's exactly what we're seeing right now. They use about, of the amount I told you, the 12,000, they used 11,110 gallons in the subsurface. They used 1,029 at the surface. The day before that, they used 200 at the surface. They would rather
200,000 or 200 gallons?
200 gallons, sir. The Coast Guard would rather at the surface use surface burning whenever possible. Surface burning is obviously depends on the wind and, of course, skimming and other collection operations. You asked about the monitoring that we do in the subsurface. There are three basic pieces of data that are reviewed every night by a team of federal scientists. The first is particle size. The smaller particle size is a measure of dispersion, if you will. The second is dissolved oxygen. There's been lots of concern that there would be too little oxygen in the system, and when that happens, the system becomes hypoxic and creatures die, to put it mildly. And the third is a toxicity test, which is done on a critter called rotifer. And those tests were agreed to by a panel of scientists because we can get them back quickly. And right now we're seeing usually above 90% survivability when we expose this creature to the oil dispersant water mixture. I think we've had one or two samples maybe in the high 80% survivability.
Okay, my time has expired.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the chairman emeritus of the committee, Mr. Dingell.
This question for the witness from the Coast Guard and from the Army. Louisiana's proposed building a chain of sand barriers along the Louisiana coast to prevent oil from hitting coastal wetlands. The plan has not yet been approved. Why and when?
There's a consideration that the Federal On-Scene Coordinator uses in a proposal like this, and it's primarily how effective is it going to be? Is it the most effective thing in the trade-offs?
By the time you decide that, I have a notion that the oil will be well into the wetlands. How long is it going to take to come to this decision?
first of all, we have to get a reading from the Corps and the other agencies as to whether it's going to be more hazardous to the environment than it would be if you didn't do it. And then secondly, we have to make a determination if it's going to be effective stopping the oil.
All right. Now, which agency down there has responsibility for the environmental impact statement? It's the Department of the Interior, is it not?
That's correct.
All right. Now, you did not require a environmental impact for the particular impact statement for the particular well that we're talking about in the spill. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now,
there's a legal constraint.
Let me continue, please.
Okay,
because I have a limited amount of time.
Pardon me.
Why did you not have an environmental impact statement? Each drilling undertaking is different, and each part of that is of the tract on which you had the general environmental impact statement is different, and the equipment is all different. Why was there not an environmental impact statement on that?
The administration has asked the Congress to change the law under the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act. The department is required to process an exploration plan and permit within 30 days.
The law, I didn't ask about 30 days. I want to hear about that later. But the National Environmental Policy Act is still in force. It requires you, wherever there is going to be a significant environmental impact, to file one of these environmental impact statements. Why was that not filed here?
CEQ has a categorical exclusion for this activity.
Why did they give that?
They did that in 1986. Nancy Sutley, the chair, has started to review that.
What year did they do it in?
Pardon me?
What year did they do that?
1986. 1986.
86. Okay. Now, explain to me, if you please, why I'm hearing about the risks of drilling or failure to drill properly, and I'm not hearing anything about the steps that the agencies have taken to assure that good drilling practices are followed.
Congressman, the Minerals Management Service spends about $30 million a year on an inspection program, has 66 full-time inspectors. We are doing a stem-to-stern evaluation, however, of whether that enforcement mechanism where they check against the prescriptive requirements and the regulations is adequate or not. And that's going to be an important outcome, I think, of the investigation that has started and the presidential commission that has been established.
Now, you tell me that you are required to come to a decision within 30 days on these permits. Is that in the statute?
It's in the statute.
Do you have any authority to waive or to extend that?
No authority, unfortunately. It's a shall. And the legal counsel, since this law was passed in 1978, have said there's no authority to extend it.
All right. Now, MMS has granted 27 categorical exemptions to oil and gas companies. Would you submit to the committee the list of the categorical exemptions that you have given and why those categorical exemptions have been given in each instance?
Certainly.
Please. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent that the records stay open so that can be received.
Without objection, so ordered.
Now, I note that you have given categorical exemptions to a well in 4,000 feet deep. Here you gave one at 5,000 feet. And you now have one that I note is given to Anadarko Petroleum for a plan that will be for a drilling undertaking that will be more than 9,000 feet. Why are these given, and explain why they are a, quote, category of actions which do not individually and cumulatively have a significant effect on the human environment, and for which, therefore, neither an environmental impact assessment or an environmental impact statement is required. and I'm quoting from the actions of the agency. Please explain that.
Congressman, I'd have to look at those specific examples. They have been, those were preceded by 2 environmental impact statements, one in connection with the 5-year plan under which those leases were granted, and then a second environmental impact statement is prepared for each specific lease sale under the 5-year plan. You raise a very important point, though, and Chairman Sutley and Secretary Salazar 10 days ago suggested a top-to-bottom review of the NEPA approach taken by the Minerals Management Service.
Can you make a bold statement that every action that was taken by the drillers in each of these cases conformed in full to the environmental impact statement and to the permit?
I personally cannot.
Okay. Would you submit for the record a statement that you can or cannot, and if so, why?
Certainly.
Thank
Certainly,
you.
Congressman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton.
Thank you, Chairman Markey. First thing I want to establish is chain of command. Admiral Watson, when I was in Louisiana with Chairman Markey several weeks ago, the top federal official on site was an admiral named Mary Landry. Is she still the top federal official on site?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Who does she report to?
She reports to Admiral Thad Allen.
Okay. And who does he report to?
He reports to Secretary Napolitano.
And who does she report to?
The President.
So that's the chain of command.
Yes, sir.
The President, Napolitano, Admiral Allen, and then Admiral Landry.
Yes, sir.
Is there any private representative on site that doesn't have to report to Admiral Landry?
There is a requirement under the Oil Pollution Act of 1990 that we have a unified command and that the federal on-scene coordinator is the person with the 51% vote. Now, we do have a unified command in which we have a state on-scene coordinator, so the states are well represented, as well as a coordinator from the responsible party.
The point I'm trying to get across, the British Petroleum representatives, the Halliburton representatives, the Cameron representatives, the Transocean representatives, any other contractor that works for a private company, they have an independent chain of command through their companies, but they have to work with Admiral Landry or her designee. They cannot act independently. Is that not correct?
That's correct. The COO of BP is in our command center.
All right.
He is right next to Mary Landry.
Okay. Now, I want to go to Administrator Jackson. We've talked quite a bit, and you mentioned in your testimony the dispersant issue. And I want to say right off the front that I think that's a judgment call, and I think EPA has made the right judgment. I think it is the right judgment to try to use these dispersants to try to keep the oil underwater as opposed to letting it get on the top of the water where it would wash on shore and could foul up the beaches and the marshlands. So I am not negative at all about the decision to use dispersants. And I understand some of your testimony about qualitative differences on how much to use. I think the least you can use, the better. I'm not second guessing that. My question is, as the administrator EPA, has British Petroleum received approval before using dispersant, and have they ever used dispersants in a way that EPA specifically disapproved of?
The answer to your first question is they were pre-approved through the Federal On-Scene Coordinator's Regional Response Plan that use of dispersants at the surface, as long as it was on the EPA product schedule, was allowable for surface application. So that is yes. I believe you said, were they approved? Yes, by the FOSC ultimately, but in conjunction with the RRT. They specifically requested approval to use it in the subsurface and received that I believe it was May 14th. The date is in my testimony, my oral and written testimony. And then you asked if at any time their application of disbursement has been in violation of an order. I would say the closest that we got to that was Sunday night, when my concern was that we had already approved the use of subsea dispersant. All the testing and science was showing that it was working, and yet the amount of spraying at the surface kept going up. And the conversation that I had with Admiral Landry, and then she brought in Mr. I'm sorry, I don't remember his name. His first name is David, I'm sorry, was that we wanted to see that go down. Their initial response was that they didn't understand that, but they did come around. And we have seen the amounts go down, as I mentioned in my testimony.
Again, there can be honest differences of opinion about just the fact that you use dispersant or not, about the qualitative differences, but in terms of the policy, they have gotten approval before beginning, and they have, while they've had differences of opinion, they have not continued to do something that EPA or the on-site federal official, Admiral Landry, didn't approve of. That's a true statement.
It is. The one piece of color I'd add to that, sir, is just that we at this point, I do not feel like I have the science to say with certainty that they are using the least toxic dispersant out there. So we are getting that science. It will take time.
Okay. I know my time's expired, Mr. Chairman. I have two more questions. One is for the representatives of the Corps of Engineers. I want to know why, in God's name, Louisiana hasn't gotten approval to begin to build these berms. They've been waiting for over a month. Why would you not assign responsibility to the governor of Louisiana and tell them to do what they can to protect their marshland?
Sir, we actually received the permit request on May 11th. We quickly coordinated that request, went back to the state. They agreed that they needed to modify their request based on some issues that were developed. We took their modified request, and we've been working with that. One of the main issues is the time it would take to do it. The state's request, you can think of it as 19 increments of berm. We just Corps did an analysis of how long it would take to construct the shortest of those increments, and it was 5 months. Part of the analysis then is how much of this is it reasonable to permit under the emergency provisions. The Jacksonville District Commander proffered that to the governor.
So basically, you've sat on your bottom for a month and nothing. And I think you got some permitted today. Isn't that correct? Six sections got permitted, and in the meantime, the oil is in the marshland. Well, even if it didn't work.
Sir, my math is 13 days, but yes, in that process of trying to sort. I mean, the question really is it more harm than good to throw up a berm for over 100 miles along the coast?
And so the Corps' judgment is it's more harm.
And the Corps' judgment is that there's a part of that proposal that is beneficial. That's the part that it worked through with the state and others. I'm not sure that the state hasn't accepted the offer yet, but that was offered.
Well, if the Corps had given approval immediately, could not some of the oil that gotten in has been able to infiltrate into the marshland? Would it not have been prevented from getting into the marshland?
Sir, I honestly don't think so.
You don't think so?
No, sir. I mean, I think we're talking about large berms, and to achieve some of the benefits you're talking about, like I said, to complete the shortest of the berms, the Corps' estimate was 5 months.
Well, maybe if Louisianans did it, it might not take 5 months.
Even if we accept those kind of efficiencies, sir, I think there's still the Corps was trying and is committed to try to find the path forward.
I encourage you to try harder. I thank the chair's discretion.
Great. The gentleman's time has expired, and Mr. Hayes, we know that you have an important meeting, obviously, because of your responsibilities you have to go to right now. So we thank you for coming here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to respond to any further questions for the record.
Point of information, Mr. Chairman, is it possible that someone from MMS could be here in his replacement, since we do have a hearing and we're in Congress? We'd like to have somebody here. There's many of us that still want to ask him questions.
I don't know that there is anyone designated by the Secretary to replace Mr. Hayes.
We do not have anyone else here.
Can he possibly wait for one series of questions?
I know that they're part of this spill response team, and Mr. Hayes is responsible for it, and I just don't want our hearing to interfere with his ability to participate in the important decisions which are being made right now. So, okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Capps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank each of our panelists. And it's been a very arduous process, both down in the Gulf and here answering questions. Workers and volunteers and local residents are at risk, as we speak here, for a host of negative health effects. Just yesterday, the Unified Command recalled fishing vessels working on the spill due to workers' experience of nausea, dizziness, headaches, and chest pains. Previous spills have shown that more serious health problems may arise over time. Administrator Jackson, according to an LA Times interview with some fishermen who were working on the results of the spill yesterday, or the interview was yesterday, while they were told not to touch the oil in their training, they weren't provided with any protective equipment by BP. Instead, they wore leather boots, regular clothes on the boat to work the spill. When asked what BP told them, the fishermen responded that they, meaning the BP officials, told us if we ran into oil, it wasn't supposed to bother us. Do you think that BP has done enough to protect the health of the oil spill responders and the Gulf Coast communities?
Based on that story, no, ma'am. No.
Just for the record, I was at a hearing earlier today with the CEO of BP, and I asked the same question, and I didn't get any response. So it seems to me that while BP does have some technical expertise and experience in drilling, when it comes to public and worker health, there is no reason that we should assume that BP has the expertise, the willingness to use its resources, or incentives to really address the issues that are involved here. Now, EPA is already taking steps to protect the health of workers and communities, as you mentioned in your opening remarks. You are collecting data. You are doing monitoring and surveillance. But are there some other ways that EPA is communicating about health risks to the public?
We are, the primary means that we use are, for those who have internet access, we put up information to help communities. It's a right to know. A basic tenet of environmental protection is that people have the right to know. We do that in conjunction with our partners and with the command. We also have put up a translation in Vietnamese so that there is access to not everything, but some information, particularly that related to human health. We continue to get data. We've had a series of public meetings, and we've been fortunate enough to be joined with our partners, often the Coast Guard, NOAA, Department of Interior, Fish and Wildlife are there to answer questions. Just as your particular issue, we would normally refer that to OSHA, and Dr. David Michaels, I believe, has been very adamant about the need for OSHA to stand up and be very available through the Unified Command for any questions related to work, specifically to worker health.
Thank you. And so I'm assuming that EPA is also translating, well, you're translating literally to other languages, but as data is being collected, as this ongoing process occurs, you will use this. Do you use any other methods either as well to keep the local communities and workers and volunteers apprised of new data as it comes along?
Oh, absolutely. We're trying everything we know to help the communities understand what we do. Just the other day when I was out there, we had NGOs who were particularly concerned about odor complaints ride along in our mobile lab so they could understand and tell us where they might want us to go to focus on information. It is a continual process, and it's one that we do under the direction of the Coast Guard. They've been very, very supportive of any efforts EPA makes to bring in and inform the local community. And of course, since I'm from Louisiana, at least, and the Gulf Coast region for sure, that I think that nothing could be more important.
Thank you. And also, just to follow up even more, you mentioned OSHA. You talked about collaboration with Coast Guard. Are there other agencies as well that should be involved in some of these public health responses?
Well, certainly when it comes to seafood safety, it's the Food and Drug Administration, along with and in partnership with NOAA, because NOAA is collecting so much data out there. I believe either today or yesterday, EPA was asked by NOAA to join some of their deep sea cruises. We generally don't do a lot of sampling out in the deep sea. That's NOAA's responsibility, but there's good cooperation there. And we're working very closely with our federal partners to help ensure that all data is getting up on the web. EPA has a bit of experience in that regard as well.
Thank you. You know, earlier this week, this full committee of Energy and Commerce, we had held a markup for a bill that will provide necessary health care to 9/11 responders, if you can believe, this many years after that, who continue to face negative health consequences when their heroic work after the Twin Towers fell. Responders to this oil spill, including local shrimpers and fishermen and volunteers and community residents, shouldn't be choosing to save the life of the Gulf region, which they definitely want to participate in doing, while having, you know, the choice then to put their own health and lives at risk. And this time, I hope we can, as I'm encouraging you to continue doing what you're doing and even expand it, all of these agencies here, that we don't find ourselves in the same position 10 years from now that we did before.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to just acknowledge the Coast Guard's very strong precautionary action yesterday when there was the first sign of complaint. It's very warm down there. That oil is a light crude, sweet light crude. It does volatilize, and it can have effects on folks. Even folks in the Gulf, we think we're pretty tough as it is. And so I could not emphasize more strongly, although it's out of my lane per se, that proper protective equipment, erring on the side of precaution, is extremely important for anybody down there.
I know that I'm run out of time. If there were more time, or maybe you can submit for the written a record, Admiral Watson, or any others that wish to submit some statements about this fact.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I just want to emphasize that safety is the first thing that we discuss in every one of our meetings, and of course we're reactive immediately if we find there's a concern. And I have been in personal discussions with Dr. Michaels, and OSHA is very much a part of our.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Capps. At this point, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkins.
Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Stearns, the order that we had when we started with opening statements is when the gavel drops by seniority, and he was here when the gavel dropped.
All right, the chair recognizes Mr. Stern.
And I thank the gentleman, Mr. Shimkus. Admiral Watson, recently, the press secretary for the president, Robert Gibbs, indicated, quote, "There's nothing that we think can and should be done that isn't being done." Nothing. He was pretty emphatic about that. And I guess the question for you is, in your present position, do you think absolutely everything is being done that possibly could be done to clean up this oil spill?
Sir, I was sent down there to do everything that could be done. My assignment was to be.
Oh, I understand your assignment,
I really feel like I've done my duty. We have brought to
Have you done everything possible that could be done to clean this oil spill, in your best opinion?
From personally and from my perspective inside the organization, yes, sir.
Now, ABC ran a news story yesterday in which they interviewed a lot of the small fishermen. They said, "We have boats. We're ready to go out and skim off the oil to help out." Why aren't all those unemployed fishermen, why aren't you using a lot of their boats to help out?
Sir, I think we have over 500 fishing vessels. I think the number is closer to 600.
They showed boats after boats on ABC. The people were, and they interviewed these individuals.
Well, I just know that we've accepted vessels of opportunity from all the fishing vessel communities. We've given them the training, the equipment, and we've deployed them, and they are being used to recover.
Well, you heard Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Barton indicate that Governor Jindal has asked for approval to put these oil spill booms out and hasn't got it. He's also got partial approval for building the berms. Why wasn't that done earlier if you think everything's been done that has been done? Why haven't you given the approval for the governor on the oil spill booms?
Sir, on the berms, that is a tactic that hasn't been used before. We need to know.
No, let's
from
take the first
experts-
one about the booms. I mean, he's been asking that for some
Sure,
time.
there's 1.8 million feet of booms out. We've put booms down to the maximum level of effort possible. And there's...
He's indicated in a press conference yesterday that the federal government, he wants them to approve millions of feet of boom, and he's waiting for their approval. He hasn't got it. This is the governor. So you're saying you have approved everything, you're not going to approve any more?
We're still flowing booms in as fast as we can into the state of Louisiana.
Okay. Well, I'm just telling you what the governor says. Now, it's also reported there's lots of countries that want to help out. They want to send their ships over here. They want to provide research, technical expertise, oil pumps, skimmers, wildlife treatment. All these countries have listed, and yet there doesn't appear to be, I mean, you've had Mexico, maybe one other country. Why haven't you accepted support from and help and assistance from all these other countries? I think there was 15 countries that were cited.
Yes, sir. I can't address each one of those, but we do have State Department in our organization, and we are using the presence of BP around the world to access those resources. We are flying Canadian aircraft. We're using boom from the Middle East, from Europe.
It was also reported that Holland has a ship and a mechanism to take up 80% of the oil by skimming it. Did you know about that?
We do have the...
Have you contacted Holland to see what the process is they have in place?
We have a dedicated group of engineers that are working with proposals like that, sir. I can't speak to that.
Okay, but it's been 5 weeks. It seems like from day one, if you'd had boats out there to take off the skim and oil pumps and skimmers and this expertise, then it would have delayed hitting the shores of Louisiana. Don't you agree with that? That you should have had a day one, somebody out there doing that?
Sir, we responded on day one with everything that we had. This equipment takes time to flow in, and these novel things need to be evaluated further.
Day 21, you did nothing. There was no skimmer boats out there. There was nothing being done. And I don't see any foreign countries out there that you've approved coming in. And, you know, the governor now has for 2 weeks been asking for you to give waivers. Why didn't you do it earlier for the oil spill booms?
We have a total of 1,500 vessels, sir. I'm not sure which ones you're referring to that we don't have working.
Well, I mean, the first couple of weeks you weren't skimming the oil at the site. You weren't trying to contain the oil. The oil was just. I was out there. I saw it. I was in a Coast Guard aircraft. It was flowing everywhere, and you could see it come up. It was emulsified orange. Everywhere you looked, you saw it, and there were nobody skimming it up. Nothing. And this was. You know, this is about 3 weeks ago. So for you to sit here and tell me, Admiral, that you've done everything possible and let this thing hit the Louisiana shore, you've got to take some culpability here. You've got to stand up and say we could have done more. And you can't go along with the administration that keeps saying, oh, yeah, we've done everything possible, because it's clear you haven't.
Thank you, Mrs. Stearns. At this point, the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. And first, what I'd like to do is ask if there are any known methods out there, maybe Mr. Saul could answer this, or Administrator Jackson, that would be effective in protecting the marshes. Are building dirt walls effective? Are putting human hair booms? I mean, is there anything out there that would be effective?
Sir, I believe we're trying everything we know to try.
Well, I mean, is there any method that's known that would be effective, whether or not you're using it, whether or not you're deploying it, getting oil to prevent oil from coming ashore? Is there anything out there that can prevent that? I know that the oil is dispersed in the water. It's not just on the surface. So it's a difficult problem. Is there any known technique or method that would be effective in this situation?
Sir, beyond what's being tried right now, no, sir, I don't know anything more.
Ms. Jackson?
Sir, as we heard the Admiral say, we're using all the methods that are typically used. I have almost every day someone who emails me with an idea of some sort. There have been so many that there was a technical group put together under the leadership of the command to try to evaluate them. It is very, very difficult, sir, to do science on the fly, right, when you're in the middle of something of this magnitude and not to do harm. I mean, one of the concerns is that in our rush to want to do something, we want to make sure we're not making the bad situation worse in the long term.
Okay, thank you. Rear Admiral, is there, looking in the mirror a little bit now, is there anything that the United States government could have done that would have been more effective? Taking control of the administration of this, or any administrative or technical thing that we could have done that the United States government could have done that would have been more effective?
My personal feeling is that once this manifested itself with all of that oil coming up onto the surface, we did have weather conditions that did provide, that did force us to retreat on occasion. I think that from a what could we have done differently, it would have been in the time since drilling has moved outward, we could have changed our readiness and increased our planning factors for this kind of a spill. We have contingency plans that are really based on worst case scenarios that aren't as worse as this one is, and that's would have potentially changed our resources that were available when the event occurred.
When, in your opinion, would it have been hurtful or more effective to take control of this from BP? In other words, my understanding is that BP is running the show with the oversight of the federal government. Would it have been more effective for the federal government to take control and to give direction to the various players?
Well, let me just explain the type of control that we have over BP. First of all, they are required to have a contingency plan. They're required to have oil spill response contractors and other contractors to respond to the type of incident that they might have. And then when the incident occurs, they have to become a part of the organization. If we find that they're non-responsive, then we would begin to give them more direct orders. But in this particular case, we've been working this response as a unified command, and we found that the resources that BP has been able to bring have been valuable, and there have been no circumstances that I've observed where they have not complied with the plan of the day for the oil spill response.
Thank you. I'm going to yield my time back and recognize, is it your turn? The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not trying to manage time, but I appreciate that. I obviously, thank you all for coming again. We wouldn't wish this on anybody. This is what we have, and we're doing, I know, and there's a lot of frustration. And I think part of the frustration is, we are the representatives of the people. And I know the folks in Louisiana are frustrated. The whole country is really frustrated. And with new technology today, we see every gee whiz bang solution, that can save this thing from putting straw on the thing and soaping it up. That was one that went around last week. And, Kevin Costner's going down there to get his little whirly bird thing down there to help. People want to help. They see all these things. I think the other part of the frustration, if I was the governor of Louisiana, I'd just do it. I would just do it and suffer the consequences. The court of public opinion, he wins by trying to save his marshes. I wouldn't wait for the federal government, but I'm not the governor of Louisiana, so I guess I don't have to make that call. Administrator Jackson, I said I'd be very kind, and I'm going to be. What is the name of this dispersant that we're talking about?
Corexit, there are two different formulations, Corexit 9527A and 9500A.
And which, are they both being used, or is one over the other, or?
Yeah, they've both been used. I think the only one that's currently being used is 9500A.
And you mentioned some type of list.
There's.
Can you explain, just for me, explain that list, and is the 9500, is that on that list?
9500 is on the product schedule, which is authorized and listed in the National Contingency Plan.
So this 9,500 is what's being used. The only kind of different thing about this is there's been approval for it to be dispersed deep, kind of right at the spill.
Yeah, that the novel application is this injection right as the spill was coming out. That stopped yesterday, actually, as they did initiated the top kill operation. So I don't think it's happening right now. But the other novel thing is the volume used. It is usually used over a shorter period of time. So there are certainly U.S. record volumes used here.
And so then on this, so it's usually dispersed on surface, and this is new. And so that's, and could part of this, I mean, I give credit to Chairman Markey. I mean, this whole debate of how much is being spilled is very important. I sat through people taking pictures and trying to do the flow diagrams, and I had some thermal fluids at my military school that I attended, and if we had a lower projection of what was being released, and then this dispersant was being used volumetrically in proportion to what we thought it was, would that not make the case that that's why we have probably some more surface appearance versus, could that have been a reason, you think?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Certainly, when you use a dispersant, as I understand it, at the surface, you have to set your nozzles to a certain rate of application. And one of the important things is making sure that you're not wasting it, if you will, accidentally spraying it or having it drift over open water. It's not going to do any good. And one of the big lessons that we will learn, frankly, on the fly here with this subsea application is maybe we've found a tool that could be used in future, God forbid, accidents.
Could be used positively.
Yeah, if we continue to believe that this is a much more effective way to get at the problem, this means you can use less of the chemical, and we're seeing issues. Now, the one thing that people are pointing out is that there is no data on the long-term fate of this material, this dispersed material. So we're going to...
So we don't know if it's biodegradable or stuff?
It is biodegradable. We know that...
Is there a timeline for that?
The studies that have been done, there's a French study and some other work that's been done that says within a month it biodegrades. What's a little unusual is that's assuming surface application, and we're in 5,000 feet of water here. And
you mentioned France. Are there other, so I guess the French use this, or other countries of use of this, especially this 9,500 one? I mean, is this commonly used around the world, or?
Let me get the answer back to you on the record for that. There's been some back and forth about a British ban. The British don't use Corexit in their shallower water. They're testing it in deeper water.
Yeah. Again, thank you for all you do. All hands on deck. We got to get this solved. Hopefully, we were successful today. And I yield back my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Shimkus. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for having run in and out, but we also have other committees and issues, but I appreciate our panel being here. I represent a very urban district in Houston, and we have the Houston Ship Channel, and so we wouldn't be there without the Coast Guard. And needing dispersant, just recently we had two ships collide in the upper channel, and we had the booms, and nothing on comparison of what's going on now. So our experience is in much smaller spills, and we're literally finding out what we can do on these huge spills, and we've never had one before. In fact, a lot of the technology we have today, I was a state legislator in 1979 when the well exploded in the Bay of Campeche, and we saw oil on the Texas coast, and it was much more tragic than what we're seeing now. But again, we don't want to see that or this or anything. I appreciate the panel being here. I know the Department of Interior left, and I had some concern about and I know the President just announced the expansion or the 6 months on drilling in deep water or floating rigs. And there are a lot of members, including this committee, who had some concern about the shallow water, which is 1,000 foot or less, and so I have some concern to make sure that can continue, because actually we need the natural gas safely produced. But let me talk about the dispersants, because Madam Administrator, And again, we're making history. We've never had to disperse this much, and we've never had the underwater plumes that are so deep, I guess, because again, the Houston Ship Channel, even where it was at, it wasn't 45 foot. So, you know, it was very small compared to what we're experiencing. Corexit is, from what I understand, biodegrades rapidly and does not bioaccumulate. And does it not include any known carcinogens or endocrine disruptors? Is that, Ms. Jackson, is that information that you can share with us?
There is testing that I've asked my scientists to do. It will take about a week to look specifically at endocrine disruptors. Listen, it is a chemical, sir, so it has a toxicity to it. It is less toxic than oil, but it has toxicity.
Well, and I can understand your response to Congressman Shimkus. You know, you see the planes flying over, and, you know, it's kind of like trying to put out a forest fire. Once you put the dispersant out, it's going in open water as well as water that has the plume or the oil on the surface. Are there any other alternatives other than Corexit in the secondary one that can be used, and what are the availability of alternatives other than that?
Sir, I believe there are 14 or 15 different dispersants listed on the National Contingency Plan product schedule. And the way the area response plan reads, potentially any of them could have been used. The concern became that as this thing has become a longer-term release, whether or not the original decision to use Corexit might not be looked at again, whether there was something less toxic out there. BP has not identified anything less toxic. My belief is that there's more science needed on that, and so we're going to do it.
Okay. And again, our concern is the secondary, but is that particular dispersant, has it improved the situation of the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico?
Sir, it is a tough trade-off, but I believe it has been a useful tool. Again, as I understand it from the Coast Guard, the FOSC would rather use burning and booming. Surface dispersant application is really her last choice because it is inefficient. This subsurface method certainly bears further study for potential options in the future. But I think we owe it to everyone, especially when I go down there and I talk to shrimpers and others. There's a lot of concern, and right now I can't give them all the answers they'd like about whether or not this dispersant is in the water. So we're taking the samples. We've gotten some very, very limited water samples back, and so far we don't see any of the constituents from the dispersant in the water. But we're going to get another 60 or 70 samples back in the next few days.
Okay, great. Any other panelists on the dispersants? Admiral Watson.
Congressman, I would just add that dispersants have been in our inventory to respond to oil spills for a long time, 20 years.
Yeah.
And we've never used this much, but over those years, I think we have found them effective. They've been effective in this particular spill, particularly.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Green. The votes have been called. There's about 12 minutes left, so I ask the remaining members to be mindful of that there's 3 members that still wish to speak. At this point, the chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. They'll hold votes for us. This is important. Administrator Jackson, is it biodegradable?
Yes, sir. Oil does biodegrade. It takes
a
while.
By what action does it do that? Does it oxidize? Does sunlight change it, or do bacteria digest it?
Bacteria under aerobic conditions digest oil, sir.
What research has been undertaken by EPA to investigate the ability to use normal occurring bacteria to deal with an oil spill?
There are products listed on the National Contingency Plan schedule that are I forgot the name for them, but they're considered to be aids to biodegradation. That's different than dispersants. So there is some work authorized under the NCP for EPA to evaluate and potentially list them as tools that can be used in a response.
Exxon Valdez, some people felt that some of the mitigation efforts were actually as harmful or more harmful to the shoreline than was the oil itself. Given that information, has EPA been actively engaged in any research with any university or academic arrangement to try to develop these bacterial digesters?
Well, EPA wouldn't necessarily develop them. That's the innovation and ingenuity of the American people, sir. But EPA does have a lab. I believe we partner with Environment Canada up in Nova Scotia to look at.
How many of these are you evaluating?
Sir, I don't have an answer for you on what we're evaluating right this second. What I mean to say is part of our regulatory responsibilities, we would have to list these on the project.
We've got to go fast because he's got a quick gavel. We've been very fortunate since Exxon Valdez and Mr. Green mentioned the Gulf of Campeche. We've been very fortunate with oil spills, but we got a lot of activity in the Gulf. We've driven our exploration out to deeper and deeper levels because we've put so many areas off limits, and yet we've still demanded the energy. So with that in mind, would it not have been prudent for the Environmental Protection Agency to have opened this up to requests for proposals to have people bring in their products and understand better how to deal with these problems up front?
Well, I think EPA relied on the oil industry, and in this case specifically BP, who said that this would not happen. So that's why we're having to...
That's a real troubling aspect. I realize we lost our Department of Interior person and we fired the MMS person, but this application is, I mean, it's a scandal in and of itself, and it's not just EPA's, but from a regulatory standpoint. Yeah, shame on BP for turning this in. A scenario for potential blowout of the well, which BP would expect to have the highest volume of liquid hydrocarbons, is not required for the operations proposed in this exploration plan. Well, that's bad judgment on BP's part, but the agency in charge of regulating and approving, it's really bad judgment on their part. It seems like the EPA really should be more forward-leaning in this regard. We do have a lot of activity going on in the Gulf of Mexico. The President did outline a plan for other areas to be open for exploration. We've been very lucky not to have spills, but spills are going to happen. Maybe not of this magnitude again in our lifetimes, but spills are going to happen. And it does seem to be prudent that the EPA would take a forward-leaning role in this regard. The industry, to be sure. Now, the injection of this dispersant at 5,000 feet underwater, whose idea was that?
The request to do the injection came from BP, and sir, I know, I just want to make sure I know you know this, but many in the room may not realize that EPA does not review drilling applications. So I think you should get a response from MMS and DOR.
Yeah, I would love it if they were here, but we were denied that opportunity, as you saw. They left before those of us on the lower ends of the dais got a chance to question. And they fired the other lady this morning, so that was unfortunate for us. It just seems like, after all this time, we've heard it in this committee, we heard it on television on Rachel Maddow last night, the anxiety of people because we have not developed these contingencies. And maybe it's not EPA's place to do that, but it seems like EPA would have an ongoing forward-looking strategy to deal with spills as they occur. Let me ask you a question. Is this going to eliminate deepwater drilling in the Gulf? We've got a 6-month moratorium the President proposed today. Is deepwater drilling in the Gulf over?
Oh, I don't have a crystal ball, sir.
Is this the 3 Mile Island for deepwater drilling in the Gulf? No deepwater drilling, no nuclear? With hydrologic fracturing prohibitions that are we heard in this committee just yesterday, are we going to have anything left as far as producing energy for the American people that's of an American origin? Are we going to lock everything off?
Sir, I don't have a crystal ball, but I would refer to what the President said today, which is that until he can assure this can be done safely, first let's remember 11 people died here, and then that it can be done safely so that the states around the Gulf Coast, all of whom use it for varying purposes, including energy production, can feel certain that their interests are protected. I think he said that he believes we need to have more time to make sure we understand exactly what happened here.
I don't disagree with that. If it's to be done safely, though, the applications must be followed to the letter.
Gentleman's time has expired. If Mr. Scalise is going to, we have to go back to Ms. We have to go to Mr. Scalise. If we could, Mr. Scalise, I'll give you 3 minutes, Mr. Scalise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me try to get as much in as I can. I know Mr. Barton talked about the chain of command, and I've got a real interest in what that chain of command really was, because when I read the Oil Pollution Act, it's very clear that the President is the one who is directly responsible for ensuring effective and immediate removal of the discharge. And for too long, especially in the first few weeks, but even still today, our local officials are still being sent through BP to get approval for various things that they're trying to do to protect the marsh and the coast. And so I'll throw it out to whoever will answer this question, I guess the Coast Guard, since technically we were told the Coast Guard is in charge. Why is BP still in charge of certain recovery operations? I can understand if they're dealing with the well, but why are they dealing with things that have nothing to do with the well?
The Coast Guard Federal On-Scene Coordinator is responsible for the response, sir, and if there's any other activities that go on outside of that organization under the Federal On-Scene Coordinator, those things can be done, and the recourse for compensation for those is back to the responsible party. So I think we may be seeing some of those independent activities. And when
well, let me be specific, because again, my time is short. What about boom? The boats that are supposed to lay out boom. We were told our local fishermen were going to be hired to go do that. Many fishermen say they've not gotten any involvement in this. This is what really irritated me. On Sunday, in Jefferson Parish where I live, the Homeland Security chief told me that they actually went out and found 50 boats sitting idle at the dock that were contracted out to be laying boom. This is a day that oil is permeating into our marsh, and yet the boats that were employed to go put out boom were sitting idle at the dock. They went and commandeered a few of them themselves to go put out the boom on their own. But why did y'all let this happen?
Well, I can't explain that particular situation.
Well, who was in charge of that situation then?
We have a staging director.
Coast Guard, BP.
This is a unified command, so typically
who is this? Somebody's in charge. The President said today that he's in charge. So was the President in charge of the boom?
The President has put Admiral Allen in charge. Admiral Allen has Admiral Mary Landry report to him on a daily basis, twice daily.
So who signs the contract? I'm trying to get an answer here. I got 30 seconds left. You're running my clock out. I want to know who was in charge of putting out the boom and who let those boats sit idle at the dock on Sunday of this past week when you had oil coming into our marsh. Who did it? Can you tell me?
I can't tell you.
Nobody wants to accept the responsibility for this. You know why we're frustrated right now? We're seeing this passing of the buck. Who did it? Who let that happen?
The person on the ground who was.
Who's going to be held accountable? Give me a name.
Sir.
Give me a name.
I don't know.
Well, who can give me that?
Well, I can
it's
get back
inexcusable.
to you if I know the location.
Let me move on then. Because again, that's inexcusable as an answer. That should not have happened. If the President was all hands on deck, that wouldn't have happened. Let's talk about the governor's plan, and I'll ask the Corps of Engineers, Mr. Salt. We're being told that what was approved that the President announced today is only 2% of the governor's plan that he submitted. And in fact, if it was done 2 weeks ago, they would have laid out already 10 miles of protected barrier in front of the marsh that now is being inundated with oil. Why didn't the President get everybody in a room, or did he get everybody in a room and say, we're rolling up our sleeves, we're not leaving until this problem is solved 2 weeks ago when this was submitted?
Sir, we wouldn't agree with those numbers.
Well, was everybody brought in the room by the President to say, let's solve the problem, or did they let 2 weeks go by where people went around? I've got reports from the Corps and others where they're talking about doing environmental studies. They're doing environmental studies on this while our environment's being destroyed. That's ludicrous.
Sir, all of this is under our emergency protocols. I'd be happy to talk to you more after the hearing if you'd like.
I mean, I want answers on this. We deserve answers. Because this is going on right now. We're not talking about let's study this after the fact. This is happening right now. Sunday, the boats were sitting at the dock while oil's coming into the marsh. There's no excuse for that. I yield back.
Okay. Gentleman's time has expired, and the gentleman did have 5 minutes. The gentlelady from Florida, I can just recognize her very briefly. I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The pictures of the oil from the BP disaster that are washing up in Louisiana are horrendous, but I'm very concerned about the pollution that we cannot see in Gulf waters and places where marine life has always been very abundant. Now, marine scientists are reporting today that they have detected wide area of elevated levels of dissolved hydrocarbons throughout the water column. This follows on what the LSU Pelican found a couple weeks ago. The highest concentrations are in the recesses of the Gulf of Mexico, about 35 kilometers northeast of the disaster site south of Mobile, Alabama. Part of this area is known as the DeSoto Canyon, which is a deep valley that cuts through the continental shelf south of the Florida Panhandle. It is an upwelling of very nutrient-rich Gulf waters where marine life is abundant and plentiful. Our fisheries interact and produce enormous amounts of marine life. This pollution can't be seen from the surface, but it is a severe threat to habitat and marine life nonetheless. It's going to get into the food web, our marine scientists say. I'm very concerned that NOAA doesn't have the tools to do the monitoring. I think what I've heard from scientists is over the past decade, our data gathering and monitoring capabilities have been severely degraded. And I know NOAA is relying on a lot of the universities and academic research institutions. What are your plans to build back the capability to do this long-term data analysis that we're going to need to understand the impact of this disaster? What is your plan for being able to monitor and survey the subsurface oils and impacts of the toxic nature of this disaster?
Thank you, Ms. Castor. As you know, we have been looking at both surface and subsurface oil. And in fact, as you know, we're utilizing academic as well as our own resources in this effort, in particular the Weatherbird from University of South Florida. We have seen from some of that data, from some of those monitoring data that indicate that part per million levels of oil are at the subsurface.
To the gentlelady, and I apologize to her, there is no time left on the roll call on the House floor, and I apologize to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll look forward to visiting with NOAA and EPA.
Okay, and I do apologize to her for that. I have a unanimous consent request that a statement from U.S. Travel Associates be included in the record without objection. So ordered. We apologize.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I also would ask unanimous consent that letters from Steve Scalise and myself to Lieutenant General Robert Antwerp and to Barack Obama regarding the allowing the governor of Louisiana to build the sand berms be included in the record.
Without objection.
Would ask the record be held open for 5 days for written questions.
Without objection, it will be included in the record. We thank all of you for being here. We know you're very busy, and we thank you for your service to our country and the work which you're doing in this very difficult circumstance. Thank you.